It's time for Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock.
Believe me when I say we have a difficult time ahead of us. But if we are to be prepared for it, we must first shed our fear of it. I stand here without fear because I remember that I am here not because of the path that lies before me, but because of the path that lies behind me. I remember that for 100 years we have fought these machines. And after a century of war, I remember that which matters most. We are still here! Tonight, let us make them remember we are not afraid!
From the Sonoran Desert, where it's very nice, very nice. Now it's unseasonably hot, but it's very nice. What we're going to do this morning is we're going to talk to Charles Goyette, an old and very good friend, and this is how I got to at least stay in radio. Donna's like, no, get a job, get a real job. But, well, Charles Goyette, needs a producer to do it. Okay, that's okay. You can do that. She was his favorite talk show host. I mean, I'm way down on the list. But, Charles Goyette has had such a great reputation his entire career here in Arizona. Very well known, very well respected, very well informed, with a garage full of books. He actually read all the books of the people that came on and grilled the crap out of them. It was awesome. The problem was he was anti-war. You have the Baby Bush's Iraq War coming up, and Charles just did not play because he knew that it was this echo chamber thing that he called it that was building up the wars in the media, in the minds of the people. And it was lies, because he knew it was all lies. Lie, lie, lie. The first casualty of war is the truth. I can tell you that right now. Now, his new book, Empire of Lies, follows, a bunch of other New York Times best-selling, books. Now, Charles Goyette is also known for his advocacies for gold and his economics. His first book that went New York Times best-selling, The Dollar Meltdown, translated into freaking Chinese. Yeah, they wanted it. So we know what's happening. Watch this. Now, also, after Ron Paul's run for the presidency in 08 and then 12, Ron Paul's America was heard twice daily on 125 radio stations, with Charles was co-host along with Ron Paul, his weekly podcast. And, it's kind of like Daniel McAdams. He's up there with Dr. Paul all the time, and Charles had a really good run with Dr. Paul. And he was the first one on national media to mention Ron Paul running for office. There's a story behind that, but it was, he mentioned him. Woo, here we go. That was Charles. Now, the thing that there's a lot of stuff he and I overlap on, but I tell you the main thing that I want to discuss is that he was a voice of reason with unreasonable people. And it's, The Empire of Lies, his latest book, Fragments from the Memory Hole, and Truth is Treason in an Empire of Lies, which is Ron Paul made that quote famous. And so this is, I want to talk about him writing this particular book, how it came about, and, where it got published, how did it get published, and what it says about where we are now. And where do you get the truth about this freaking war? Charles Goyette, fill in the blanks for me. What do the people need to know about you, man?
Ernest, I think you've said about everything that possibly could be said. Hello, it's good to talk to you again, and a salute, of course, to Donna, who obviously displays good judgment in all things. Anyway, yeah, great to be great to be on your show. I don't really know where to start with all of that stuff. Somebody asked me the other day where did I derive my opposition to the war in Iraq in the first place? Well, it actually goes back, I suppose, to a general distrust of government and a discovery of the serial lies that it tells. And Empire of Lies is it's more than just a chronicle, but it certainly chronicles a whole series of lies that the deep state used to stampede the American public into one war after another. And I think it's a valuable lesson. Everybody that reads it should be prepared, should be prepared for this Iran debacle and for the next one that follows it. Before that, the Ukraine war lies, and before that, Syria, and before that, Libya, and before that, Iraq, and before that, Afghanistan, one right after the other.
We're already against the next war.
Yeah, well, look, the next war is already on the front burner. The former President Naftali Bennett, former president of Israel, said, next we've got to take out Turkey. But
what?
Of course, yeah, and I suppose, I hope they mentioned that to Erdogan there, because Turkey is a NATO ally. That'll be the end of NATO for sure, which is to me a good thing. It should have ended when the Soviet Union collapsed, and they've done nothing but endangered the American people ever since then. I mean, how replacing Gaddafi in Libya was a matter for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is totally beyond me. So, but that'll be the end of NATO, but it'll be accompanied by a lot of other chaos. But bear in mind that even after something like Turkey's only important to them because it's a way station to their long-time objective. Of course, Iran has long been an objective of the neocons and the deep state. But even bigger than that, and the name they hardly ever dare whisper, but you know that this is the objective, and that's Russia. And why they think the American people want to take out Russia, much less Turkey or anything else, is beyond me. But this is, they're the ones in charge. They run the government. They are the deep state. They are the establishment in America. And so I've tried to prepare the American people with this book for what is to come and how to see it. And it's going to be that way, by the way. I'm not promising any changes. If you read this book, it doesn't mean the country's going to change or we'll get on the right track. That is not my contention at all. My contention is until the American people start to revalue the truth as important to them, then this is our trajectory, and there is no detour as long as we're on an untruthful trajectory.
This trajectory using lies, the title's really good, Empire of Lies. Is it through lies that they become an empire, or they become an empire so they have to lie? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question. I tell you this: no matter which way you deconstruct it, lying is congenital to an empire. An empire cannot survive without lying. And as Mark Twain said, to carry the thought further about the nature of empires, you cannot have a republic of free people, a free republic, and an empire at the same time. So lying and empire go hand in hand. And they always have. It's nothing new with America, but boy, we've exploited it to a huge degree. And so actually, Ernie, I chronicle a lot of the major lies that have been foisted on us by the deep state. And I do it not because anything can be recovered or restored from that, but because this is a part of, of people learning how they are misled and how they are lied to. The subtitle of the book is Fragments from the Memory Hole. And everybody that went to high school in America should have read 1984. And the memory hole comes out
of... You're not allowed anymore.
No. So the memory hole comes out of 1984, and you'll remember the Ministry of Love. I mean, it's a typical dystopia. The Ministry of Love is where the state took you to torture you. Of course, it's the Ministry of Love. And the Ministry of Truth is where the state rewrote the history. Like Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. Whenever they need to rewrite history, they go to the memory hole. The lead character of the book, guy by the name of Winston, that's his job. He rewrites the history, takes the old history out of the record, and dumps it down an incinerator which they call the memory hole, so that that the past is unknown to the people. Well, I want to recover some of the past lies, some of the big ones that are in the most danger of slipping down the memory hole, so that people will be able to see the pattern, the methodology, the mode that the deep state uses, lying to people.
The pattern. What exposed you to? I mean, being a talk show host for a long time. Early on, you even owned a radio station in Flagstaff, didn't you?
Yeah, sure.
You know, so you've been in the radio business for a long time. Heck, you did. You had your own show when you were in the Army or something, wasn't it?
Well, I was an anchor on Armed Forces Radio and Television when I was in the military, and it was a wonderful assignment. If you got to be in the military, that was a wonderful place to be, because when there was trouble, they'd put howitzers around the around the network headquarters and stuff to make sure nothing ever happened to any of us. So that was a good thing. There were peculiarities. I like to tell this one just because it's the nature of the military. I was there during the Vietnam War. That's the generation I am. I'm a boomer. Quit dissing boomers. We're not all like that, but I'm a boomer, and I was in during the Vietnam War. It was very peculiar anchoring the news on the network, on the Armed Forces network. We were not allowed, we were absolutely forbidden from showing any film or really describing anything going on in Vietnam. Now, think about this. Vietnam is raging. It's the #1 story in the world. And when we had a hole in the newscast because we weren't covering Vietnam, the network would send us footage from the Irish Republican Army's disturbances in Belfast to fill in the gaps. So we weren't allowed. So I understand the military in one sense. They have a lot of people watching that network and watching my stations, and nobody wants to see their close friends, their children, their associates and stuff, being ground into hamburger in Vietnam. So they didn't want to show that film on TV and the network. But they replaced it with the Irish Republican Army, which very few people in America, and especially the armed forces, cared about at the time. So I don't suppose that's what started me on the road to concern about military posture. I think my biggest turning point was the prevailing military doctrine of the United States called mutual assured destruction. And I looked at that as a symbol of just the insanity of our leadership. The idea of mutual assured destruction was that we would have no defense for the people of the United States, none. The only way we'd pretend, the only substitute for defending the people of the United States from nuclear-loaded ICBMs crossing the Atlantic and the Pacific, the only defense we would have is the certainty that the Soviet leadership would have that if they blasted us to smithereens, we in turn would blast them. So it was like a standoff. They won't fire first. They won't launch a first strike because they know we'll take them out. They thought in turn we wouldn't launch a first strike because we know in turn that they would respond and take us out. And so it was a Cold War standoff, and it made absolutely no sense. No defense for the American people. Think about what we were spending: trillions on Cold Wars, trillions on defense, all kinds of weaponry, but we had absolutely no defense from the single, solitary, most important threat the American people faced, and that was nuclear ICBMs. We had no defense. Oh, I'm sorry, I've misspoken. They did carve out one little piece of defense in the anti-ballistic missile treaty. One little piece of the defense. The American governing classes were allowed to provide anti-missile defense for the capital city, for Washington, D.C. So the rest of the American people had no defense. The government had no interest in defending them, and could pursue reckless policies that made their lives even more endangered. And yet the governing classes that got us into this friggin' mess had a provision carved out that they could defend their own hometown. So,
or they get their own, bunkers, continuation of government, sure, as if that was, sure, the goal. The book, I'd like to get into some of the stories.
Yeah.
Because it follows a pattern that first off, they got to build up, how bad and evil somebody else is. And then the solution to that, we got to go kill them. And it's like the same. And I want to preface, your response with this. What happens is that you got to demean the other side, their nips, their kikes, their, Hitler, Stalin, something, slopes, whatever the hell they come up with. And therefore we must kill them. Why? What is really behind this? It seems like war for its own sake, or Smelly Butler, war is a racket. We're just going to make some money. Or it seems more and more like it's an altar sacrifice to get their stripes in hell or something. I mean, these people are bad, doing bad things they know is bad. That's like the definition of evil. And I'm wondering, what is the commonality throughout the years, the decades, the times, as you study this subject, that you see that there's a type of person, kind of like Ayn Rand's books, are all about you're fighting character or lack thereof. You're fighting people that they're not human, they're not normal. They're a different species. I mean, literally, there's something wrong with them. What's wrong with them, Charles? What kind of people are these?
Let me detour into the answer, and I really want to respond to you directly, but I think I can detour into it in a way and at least describe a part of it. And since I'm a media guy and been a media guy, I like to talk about the manifestation of this madness in the media. There is a syndrome that I call combat envy, and I call it combat envy because there's not a name for it, and you won't find it in any of the standard, psychiatric diagnostic manuals. It's not there, but it should be, because it's very, very prevalent and very, very dangerous. So combat envy is this syndrome where people seek to fill a hole in their own lives or in their own psyches by egging on wars and bragging about their non-existent warmongering achievements, their acts of daring do throughout their lifetimes. And I suppose it doesn't matter if you run into a guy in a bar and the guy in the bar says, oh yeah, I was a Navy SEAL or I was a Green Beret, and makes him feel a little better, and he wants you to buy him a drink and whatever. But when they're in the national media or in the political classes, the governing classes, it's very, very dangerous indeed. And I like to cite a couple of media examples. Let me start with this one. I've got a list of them. But let me start with this one. Well, let me even back up and start with this one. There was a guy on Fox News named Wayne Simmons. Wayne Simmons was a national security CIA veteran national security terrorism advisor. And Fox News had him on all the time. And they didn't have him on because of the wisdom of what he said. They had him on because he's pushed the wars, pushed all the wars. He was like out of his mind the way he pushed the wars. He was, and they like that because, fear is an intoxicant and it spikes ratings. This is a Fox News alert. So this guy, Wayne Simmons, was on there for years, I guess 15 years or so. And he would come up with the most insane stuff. I think it was probably 10 or more years ago, probably 12, 15 years ago, that he was pushing for an American ground invasion of Iran. I mean, scratch my head and wonder who kicked this guy off the turnip truck. So, but anyway, what really happened with him? Well, he, pushed the wars, and the real CIA guys didn't like it very much. And so one of them blew the whistle on him, and it turned out he wasn't really a national security advisor, a CIA veteran, a terrorism expert that Fox brought into our living rooms every day. He was a hot tub manager and a bookie and a felon, and he was a poseur, and so they got rid of him. But of course, they had to fill him with somebody else, and they got all kinds of crazy journals on there now. But I mean, that's one example. But a better one is probably because this guy was centerpiece in delivering news to the American people. This was a guy by the name of Brian Williams. Everybody remembers him. He was the primary anchor on NBC News, big major network primary news anchor, Brian Williams. And Brian Williams went as a reporter, as an anchor, went into the first Gulf War. He went in with a bunch of guys and, to watch and see what they were doing. And, they treat these guys with kid gloves, these media people. They don't want anything happen to them. So he helicoptered into wherever it was, Baghdad or wherever it was during the first Gulf War. So in the subsequent years, on shows like The Tonight Show, in interviews, in public appearances, he started embellishing his experience about how threatened he was, how dangerous it was. And it got worse and worse with each retelling about, we were targeted, and then the next time, I saw an RPG just headed right at me. Next time the RPG damn near hit, but it hit the helicopter behind. And we had to, I don't know what he said, we had corkscrew landing in, dangerous territory. Anyway, it just got worse and worse and worse. And the guys that were on the mission finally blew the whistle on him in Stars and Stripes. And they said, no, we were the participants, and none of what he said happened. By the way, the name of the real operation that he was on was Big Windy, which kind of describes Brian Williams. But they said it wasn't true. And once he was found out, once they blew the whistle on him with these gross distortions and exaggerations of his experience, he goes, he still couldn't take responsibility for it. So he goes, I must have had a tumor.
It was a tumor.
Seeking to excuse himself from what he had done. Now, here's the real rub of these stories, and I can tell you another one. Maybe I'll get to Bill O'Reilly. But the real story is he worked for General Electric. NBC was owned by General Electric, and General Electric doesn't have enough respect for its audience, for its viewers, to have gotten rid of the guy. Think about it. These guys are expected to tell you the truth, dig and provide accurate information about things going halfway around the world that they don't know anything about, but to at least do a diligent job of trying to provide you the real story. And on the things they know best, they prove to you that they're willing to lie and deceive you. So did General Electric fire him? No, they didn't fire him. Why? Because he was a rah war guy. And being a war contractor, they liked that. So they suspended him, I don't know, for a couple of weeks or a month, whatever it was. And then they moved him over, made him the primary anchor on MSNBC. And everybody in the media, the big players in the media, like Roger Ailes at Fox, even said, well, these are good guys. And they had their own. They had Bill O'Reilly. You remember Bill O'Reilly when we were working together. He was making up stories about his, when I lead my men in battle. Seriously, you can still find that videotape on YouTube. Now, when I lead my men in battle, but he was talking about, when I was in the war, when I was in the Falklands, I think he said he had to drag his cameraman to safety. I don't know, but in any event, he kept talking about the Falklands War where he was, and I saw wartime. I saw the reality of war in the Falklands, or all of his nonsense. He was never, I repeat, never in the Falklands, period, end of story. And it got worse. He would talk about, I saw nuns getting shot in the head. Well, he didn't see any nuns getting shot in the head. He might have seen photos in the aftermath, but he was nowhere where it was happening. I saw the Zapruder film. Should I be telling people I was there? I witnessed the Kennedy assassination because I saw photos. So anyway, but what did they do with him when he was caught up lying to the American people about his own experience? They didn't do anything. That's the respect that they have for you. If it's good for ratings,
give them a raise.
Give them a raise. That's what they're willing to do. And I'll tell you, it actually goes on to this day. I don't read any of his books, but everybody tells me that his book, Killing Kennedy, about the Kennedy assassination, is much the same thing, that he says he was on the doorstep as an investigating reporter. He was on the doorstep of, I think it was George de Mohrenschildt. He was a kind of an important figure in the nexus between Oswald and CIA. He was a CIA guy and some sort of a connection as a handler of Oswald. And he said, I was on the doorstep ringing the doorbell of George de Mohrenschildt when the shotgun blast went off and he killed himself in his home with a shotgun. And of course it was a lie. He wasn't on the door. He wasn't even in the same state in Florida. He was in Texas. And somebody came up, well, here's a phone call recorded with Bill O'Reilly at the station in Texas at the time. He certainly couldn't have gotten to Florida and back in that. So these guys make this stuff. What did they do with O'Reilly? They didn't do anything. They let him.
And what do you
continue.
call this syndrome?
I call it combat envy. They're so desirous of being viewed as important, brave, involved, knowledgeable, and in fact, and they never learn. Here's the thing: Brian Williams, even after he got found out, when the I guess it was the Obama administration made that fake gas attack strike, a deadly sarin gas attack strike on Syria that was another made up phony thing. Brian Williams is on television anchoring the news talking about it, and he starts quoting songwriter Leonard Cohen. He says, "I am guided by the beauty of our weapons." So these people, I'm telling you, they are deranged. And so that doesn't take us all the way back to the whole spectrum of your question about who are these people and how do they get there. But they're very dangerous in the media because they champion these things because it makes them feel important, and it feels some. Even I think Roger Ailes said, well, Brian Williams, he doesn't feel as good as the important generals he talks about because he never went to college. And I'm thinking that's an excuse to lie about wars. So
Lie into wars.
it doesn't cover the whole thing, but and of course there are the politicians. There's no point talking about political lies. Everybody knows, but I mean, Hillary Clinton had her stories about in Bosnia, and they were being shelled when she was helicoptering in, and they were in so much danger or whatever. I don't even remember her nonsense, but it was all nonsense. And as the truth had it, they actually landed at the airport in Bosnia or wherever the event was. They had everybody, little kids in national costumes out on the tarmac. She had Chelsea with her. Chelsea was probably a teenager at the time. I mean, there were none of these dangers that she talked about, and even Sheryl Crow was on. The comedian Sinbad was on the same flight. It was entertaining the troops, go over there. And Sinbad said there wasn't anything scary. He said the only thing scary about it is where we were going to go for lunch. So she made this up as another tale of daring do. And there are guys like, Senator Richard Blumenthal, Connecticut, talk about himself as a Vietnam veteran when, of course, he wasn't. So this stuff goes on all the time. So it's in the governing classes, it's in the media, and it doesn't cover the whole spectrum of why they lie to us about this so much. But I'll give you just a quick anecdote about the profit-bearing side. I mean, this should tell you everything. We were in Syria. The United States military, the Pentagon, was providing training and arms at the expense, of course, of the American people. I mean, somebody ultimately has to pay the bill. They were providing training and arms to fundamentalist terrorists in Syria who were fighting against Islamic terrorists who were funded by the CIA, which is a pretty good deal. If you want to arm both sides of a war, it's good for the weapons of death merchants. And I looked at Raytheon stock with all the Tomahawks being fired off. I looked at Raytheon stock last week, and they're doing just great. The American people aren't doing so great, but Raytheon defense contractors are doing great. So, there's the profit motive. There's clearly the profit motive. There's the desire that people have of a desire to rule the world. In fact, there's no better example than George W. Bush. There were so many interests that came together in that war. Karl Rove figured out that George W. Bush pulled 10 points higher if he was in a bomber jacket. So before they were done with him, they had him landed on the deck of an aircraft carrier proclaiming mission accomplished. And, that's because after all, there was going to be a midterm election in '82, and they wanted to do well in that. And so everything, but the lies run so deep. I mean, in the Bush War, there was an economist who, I think he was friendly with Bush because he was from Texas, but he was somehow placed in the first part of the administration. Guy's name was Lindsay. I can't remember. I think it might have been Larry Lindsay, but he was, for these government economists, he was a pretty fair economist. And he came out and he was maybe head of the Council of Economic Advisors. And when they were beating the drums for the Iraq War after it started, he said, well, this war could cost us like $50 billion. And they fired him for it. He said the war could cost us $50 billion. That was so set so poorly with the American people that they fired him so that they could downplay the cost of the war. And of course, it ended up costing $3 trillion. So it's all lies. It's all lies and jests. Still, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest.
And the reason, here comes something else. I wanted to show this. Save us, Walter Cronkite. It's Walter Cronkite AI. We have not just the internet, we have the internet is going to tell us what's up. So this is, and Walter Cronkite turns out to be, just part of Mockingbird and reading whatever they tell him to read and whatever. Sure. And you went through this. I want to spend some time on that a little bit because you were known as the anti-war guy. I started radio anti-war guy February of 2003 before the land invasion into Iraq. So we had that, in common. And it was your Clear Channel. You're in between, Hannity and Rush Limbaugh. I remember. So Charles was an up and comer. I mean, they had plans for Charles, and he just could not lie. He just wouldn't do it. He knew better, but he didn't know better. I remember the article. It was American Conservative, I think. It was Pat Buchanan had this magazine, and you wrote the article, "How to Lose Your Job in Talk Radio." Well, here we go. And how I knew Charles is my political activism. I had been on this show before, and became friendly. It was like, well, obviously you're libertarian, and it got to where they brought you in to explain it to you. I want you to tell that story. You got to be for the troops, and Baby Bush's administration and so on. Talk about that and what your response was and what it meant to your career that you were willing to throw into the dustbin instead of being one of these propagandists, which they expected you to do. And they explained it to you. Tell that story.
Yeah, I might get some of the details out of order because I haven't thought about that. If you think about it, the Iraq War was, built up in 2002 and launched in March of 2003. So I haven't thought about it a lot. But one of the things that leaps immediately to mind is, well, you were my producer for a while after that. And you know how ridiculous this would be. But the management, one time when I was on the air, the management called my producer on the hotline in the control room and said, "Don't let Charles talk about the war." And my producer at the time, good guy, turned out to be a really good guy, but he said, "Well, how am I, get serious, how am I going to stop him? What do you want me to do? Don't let Charles talk about the war." Of course, it was only the number one story in talk radio, in the world, in the news. So, but they didn't know what to do with me. They wanted to keep me. They had just paid me a ratings bonus. They were happy with me. They even flew me out from Phoenix to their flagship station in L.A. To do the morning show when the guy was gone or something. I mean, and the head talk show guy for probably the biggest talk show consultant in history that made more big names famous than you can imagine. I mean, if I could rattle them off, you'd know them all. He had taken a special shine to me. He liked me. He used to fly into Phoenix, sit in the studio, watch my show. And, but anyway, these people, they knew they had a problem with me because, I wouldn't shut up about the war. And it wasn't just, I'm railing against the war, but every time they'd float a new story, a new made up story about something, I'd get somebody on that had impeccable credentials to talk about why that couldn't be so. And so they didn't know what to do, and they tried to get me. One time, this is how toxic this stuff becomes. This is a bad memory for me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The stuff being on the bad guy list And nobody had to say anything. Everybody knew I was on the bad guy list. I'd walk down the halls, and people that I'd been really friendly with during the whole time I worked there would kind of duck into their side offices and stuff, so they didn't have to be seen associated with me. And one day, one of this major talk show consultant that I alluded to, he called me at home, and he was trying to figure out, and I don't blame him. He was trying to figure out, what do they do with me? Because as you say, I'm sandwiched between warmonger, Sean Hannity, and Rush Limbaugh. What are they going to do with me? And they didn't really have a solution. I had a solution for them. I could have told them what to do. I had great success as a radio programmer and owned a radio station. What they should have done was said, if they didn't like it, they should have said, listen to Charles Goyette Afternoon Drive today and see if you can figure out what he's missing. They could have made it an object of interest and stuff, but instead, they wanted to intimidate me to go along with the war. And of course, I wouldn't do that. So anyway, this consultant calls me one day at home, and he says, "Well, Charles, what? Maybe you could do this, or maybe you could do that." And I go, "No, seriously, no, I can't. I'm not going to lie about anything. I'd rather, save my soul than lie about stuff like that." So anyway, he said, "Well, I agree with you about the war, but you can't really yada yada hada hada," whatever he said, and that's lost in the annals of history somewhere. I don't remember exactly what his solution was. He didn't really have one, but he's flailing about trying to figure out what to do. And so, I said, "Well, I can't. I can't do that." And I knew I would put myself on a path of career suicide, but you have to do that sometimes. What's his name? Joe Kent just did that. So anyway, the same guy, though, calls me late at night at home again. And he says, "Charles, what I told you about my being opposed to this war, please don't mention that to anybody." It's fear. They peddle fear to keep everybody in line. And everybody knows it. I've got a thing in the book, I divide what we're talking about when we talk about the establishment and the deep state and the empire of lies. I try to, create some sort of a framework so people understand that these are all different things and they have different functions. But I can tell you guys that are establishment figures, like, let me give you this one. The guy's named Leslie Gelb. You cannot believe this guy's resume. He was, I think he was a Department of Defense official. He was a New York Times editor. He was on the board of the New York Times. He was a New York Times columnist. He was on the board of the Kennedy Center. He was on the board of one university after another. He was on. It goes on and on and on. You just look at this resume and you think, my God, how did he have time to do all that? But all the establishment places, he was a leading figure. Leslie Gelb is his name. And many people back in that day remembered him from his columns and as being an editor of the New York Times and so on and so forth. And so after the Iraq War, he said, well, my support for the Iraq War basically boiled down to, you don't want to risk your credibility with the establishment. So even if they think it's a fraud, their position in society or the positions that they own, nobody's going to keep them on the board of the New York Times if they oppose the war. So anyway, that's kind of what happened, and I ended up, had a really good contract. As I said, they just paid me a ratings bonus. In fact, they insisted on getting me on a contract there, and I wanted to work at will, which is as long as you're happy with me, I'll be happy to work here, and as long as I'm happy with you, I'll be happy to stay, and we've got a nice mutual agreement. No, they wanted to get me on a contract because they knew one of the other stations kept snooping around trying to get me over there. So I signed the contract in kind of reluctantly. And one of the terms, this contract went back and forth as these things do, it went back and forth. And so finally got the final version of it. Everything's fine. I don't have a problem with it. There's nothing wrong except one little thing. And that was, I'm a family man. I had kids. One little thing was, I didn't want to work at night, and be home with my family. So I don't care if you had to get me up at 5 a.m. for the early shift. And nobody likes that. One of my colleagues had a contract, says, I will not work that early shift. They go, yeah, we get it. And we know why. Ruins your life. So, but I said, I'd do that. I'll do any time of day, but I don't want to be on the radio at night. And this is what they said. They didn't want to draft the contract again. My boss was under a tremendous amount of pressure to get me signed. And she said, Charles, don't worry about that. You don't need to get that in there. She said, we pay you too much money to work at night, which was true because radio listening is in the day and in automobiles and stuff like that. And at night, people are watching TV at home. The radio listening numbers are way down at night. So we pay you too much money to work at night. And I go, yeah, you're right. Okay, I won't insist on a change. But when I got crosswise with them for my opposition to the war, the only thing they could do is, they could have done an honorable thing. They could have just, paid off my contract for the next year or however much was left and let me go my way. But instead, they moved me to the nighttime slot, hoping that nobody would notice they had a renegade in the lineup. So that was part of, the deal.
I remember those days, and what happened was during the day, you had the other hosts that were making fun of you. Oh, Charles, it's got, and it was, you could smell it. They were making the shift.
They were dogpiling on me. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was ugly and it was stupid. It made them look stupid. Yeah. And it just showed you the quality or the respect that they had for the audience. And when Charles went tonight, and it was like late, wasn't it like 9 to midnight or something like that? Or
7 to 10.
7 to 10.
Still, I had kids. I want to be home with them in the evening. So
yeah. So they go. Yeah, you have 2 sons, and he goes. They put you at night, and I know that you had, for the time slot, you were beating the crap out of everybody then. I can tell you that. But it was obvious what was going on, and they were running out your contract. You went to the end of the contract, didn't you?
At some point before it ended, they bit the bullet and paid me the remainder. It wasn't much, but it had run down quite a bit, and so they bit the bullet. And
so this is systemic, and I want to tell this story and have Charles comment on it a little bit. He and I were at the same station. I eventually moved from my slot and became your producer, which I was happy to do.
Which I was happy to have you.
it was, raise, you were, I thought you wanted a title, So I was like, I wasn't going to get a raise. So I go, I want to be the imperial producer. So that's how that happened,
You were.
I want a title, Yeah. But so then we went on to Air America, hired us, and it was, they were, communist radio, and they thought that we were libertarians, and then they find out immediately that we're, libertarian, and they're like, you're against this and that and that. We thought, too late, contract, and Charles knew better than to make sure that he retained control, and I did it in my future contracts and everything, that you want to be clear, whatever, put me whenever you want, but I get to control what I talk about and what I say. This is important, to maintain that. And Charles has, mentored other people doing their own contracts that you've helped with on that very kind of point. But the time that we spent together, it was obvious to me how good you were and why you were. You worked really hard at it and you understood the subject material. But it was always pressure from they, them, those for you to comport to whatever it was, and they did it through advertisers. I'm not going to advertise on a station that would allow this kind of talk, or you better whatever. And when we were over at Air America, I remember, because you hammered on John McCain so much, and as did I. But it was, in my opinion, they came because they knew he was going to be running for president in 08 or whatever, that they bought the radio station that we were on for, like 3 times what it was worth, just to clear the deck for McCain. That was my opinion. Okay, what was your opinion?
Well, let me tell you this. Since you brought up John McCain, I have a piece that's on the Libertarian Institute front page. I think that's probably 2 or 3 articles down in the last couple of days, and on antiwar.com. that probably I think it was on Friday, so you may have to go back a couple of days to find it. But it's called Combat Envy and the Strange Case of John McCain. And you'll remember this because you were in Phoenix, but this is a great story. It's going to eat up a little time, and I don't know whether I should, impose
Go,
on your
man,
audience.
till you're born aboard.
Well, it's so interesting. When John McCain was looking for a congressional seat, he was looking for a place, a good district, and he rolled into Arizona thinking that there was. I remember it all as it happened. He bought a house in Tempe for cash because there was not more than a possibility. There was a certainty that there was going to be a primary for the incumbent was not rerunning, and there was going to be a primary, and he hoped to win the primary and be elected to Congress in this highly Republican district. So he blew into town in '82, and he was quickly adopted by the publisher of the big newspapers in Arizona, the Arizona Republic and the Phoenix Gazette. And I mean, they had the weight, they had the muscle. Newspapers don't have the muscle like they did, but think about this. This was 38, for this 45 years ago or something, and they had the muscle. In fact, the publisher of the Arizona Republic was a guy named Darrell Tully, Duke Tully. They called him the Duke, and everybody kind of feared him. And because he used a heavy hand to run that station, and anybody got in his way on civic issues and stuff, he'd pound them. He'd have them pounded in the editorial pages and stuff. He was not. You didn't want him for an enemy. And he went on to say, "I tell Arizona what to think." I mean, he was quite full of himself. So when McCain blew into town, he and Duke Tully got to know one another, and it was like an instant bond between the two of them. It was the former prisoner of war, John McCain, fighter pilot, Annapolis graduate, son of an admiral who was the son of an admiral, and Duke Tully. And the thing is about Duke Tully was that he was something of a war hero too, because he flew I think 100 combat missions. He flew combat missions, I believe, in Korea. He flew as many as 100 combat missions in Vietnam. He was Air Force. And, he liked to talk about it. He would show up at military meetings, dinners, inaugural balls, or whatever they were in his full dress uniform, a lieutenant colonel, star-spangled medals all over his chest, and so on. And, pictures on his wall and the medals that he won. And so he and McCain, they were like a moth to a flame. The only problem is that Duke Tully had a severe case of what I call combat envy. Mm-hmm. And that is what drew him to McCain, because Duke Tully had never been in the Air Force. He didn't fly fighters. He had never been in Korea. He'd never flown missions in Vietnam. All the medals, the distinguished flying crosses or whatever they were, the combat medals, the bravery medals and stuff that he wore, they had pinned up on his walls, all fake. And the story finally came out, just like the story came out of Brian Williams, that he had been faking this fraud for 30 years. And when the story hit, he resigned in utter disgrace. It was hugely scandalous, and it was more so because he'd been such a mean SOB to anybody that disagreed with him over anything. So they all enjoyed dogpiling when he was disgraced, and he checked himself into a mental institution. And but anyway, here's the backstory. And I've talked to people, I've talked to executives at the newspaper and other people that were close to the situation and stuff. How did John McCain is, as I say, an Annapolis graduate, an actual fighter pilot, an actual, spent time in the military. He was an actual.
How did he not know?
Yeah. How could he not know that this guy was lying all the time? And Duke Tully, they were so close. The families vacationed together. McCain's ubiquitous pop media daughter, Meghan McCain, is Duke Tully's goddaughter. He was her godfather. So they were so close. Their families were close. How could he have not known the lies? Well, of course, the answer is, anybody with 2 brain cells would have known the lies. I mean, how could he keep the story up? If somebody told me, I've been in radio all my life. Somebody said, "Oh, I was in radio when you were in radio." "Oh, where were you?" "Oh, did you know so-and-so?" Yeah, I can't remember the name. I think I worked with him some. They make stuff up. You see right through it. So, anyway, how could McCain not know? Well, of course, he didn't want to know, because he was exploiting this combat
Relationship.
envy. And McCain was his personal, Duke Tully was his personal campaign manager, effectively. He introduced him to all the rich and famous and the Phoenix 40, the big, powerful interest group, and, raised money for him. And he gave him, had the editorial staff singing his praises all the time. So McCain ended up eking out a very narrow win in a crowded primary. I think there were 5 candidates. There were some candidates that had been, proven reliable. They had something of a track record of being honest with the American people and being good, principled conservatives that you thought wouldn't lie to you and stuff. But he beat them all out, and then it was an easy general election, so he was elected to Congress, and eventually moved up and was elected to Senate. So anyway, how did he not know about Duke Tully's lies? Well, he never really said, and nobody can explain it because it's not explainable. But this is the same syndrome of combat envy playing its way out. And so now, now wait, one thing. We not only have McCain, but we have his offspring in the form of Lindsey Graham, who palled around with him and stood in McCain's shadow all the time and wanted to be like McCain. And then when McCain died, he became like McCain and stuff. And it's gotten so bad. Lindsey Graham is so crazed in his warmongering that we're going around the world, we're overthrowing dictators, and we're
Cuba's
the
next.
whole world. Oh man, it's just like, it's insane. And even Meghan McCain said on X the other day, somebody's got to rein in Lindsey Graham. He's scaring everybody because he's so totally unhinged, and it's true. But this is the same syndrome, and that's kind of what we were up against in Arizona. That in opposing the war, you had a state Republican Party that was all warmongers. Over the years, many of them have figured it out, but it wasn't really even when Ron Paul said in the 2007 debate, that we just marched in and we could just march out. And if we had listened to him in 2007, we'd already been in the war for, I guess, 4 years at that point, but we were in it for a total of 9. Even at that point, if we had listened to Ron Paul then, we would have ended with the same outcome that we ended with years later, but it would have saved 1,000 American lives. It would have saved probably 40,000 innocent, non-combatant Iraqi lives. It would have saved the American people $1.5 trillion if we'd just done what John McCain's, Ron Paul said, and marched out at that time. But of course, we didn't do it. It wasn't, in my view, Ernie, it wasn't until, for some reason, Donald Trump came down the elevator in 2016 or 17,
15,
yeah, I guess 17,
summer 15,
and said he was running, and he was, said on the first presidential debates, they lied us into war, it was all a lie and stuff. But that was the moment. It was like, the emperor has no clothes. Somebody had the courage to say it, besides Ron Paul, and he said it, and the American people started nodding their head. Well, it'd be hard to deny it. By 2011 or 12, that it was all a lie. Not many people would be able to hold on that tightly to the fabrications, but there you were. Can I tell a fabrication or two by those guys?
Oh man, you go. Your entertainment, man. Go.
Okay, well here's a good fabrication. There are so many. Oh, I'll tell you another one. I'll tell you about Bush's daddy, the first President Bush. So the American people didn't want to go into the Gulf War. This was when Saddam Hussein was our guy. When he had a beef with Kuwait about them slant drilling and stealing Iraqi oil, whatever his beef was. He was our guy. I mean, look, the CIA put the Ba'ath Party, Hussein's party, in power in Iraq, and Hussein came along with him. He was our guy, and when we had a squabble with Kuwait and wanted to invade, he went to our ambassador to get our ambassador's approval before he did anything, because everybody's forgotten, but Saddam Hussein was our guy. Look, we gave him illegal precursors and material support in the use of illegal biological and chemical weapons in his war with Iran that we helped fund and provided intelligence for, and access to illegal, by our own standards, weapons. So he was our guy, and he went to the ambassador. She said, well, we don't have any, Arab problems. We don't take any issue with that. Basically, that was a wink and a nod that he saw. So it was a sign as he saw it, that he could go ahead and invade Kuwait. So when Bush was thinking about taking us in, and he wasn't thinking about it at first, but Margaret Thatcher had to, encourage him at a meeting in, I think it was in Aspen. She said, "Oh, George, don't go wobbly on us now." And he'd been fighting that wimp image. People said, "Oh, George Bush is a wimp," and senior, and he didn't want to be thought of as a wimp. So even Margaret Thatcher said, "You got to man up." Okay, I guess I'll have to start this war. So, but the American people weren't buying it. And why should they be buying it? Why should they send their loved ones, their fathers and brothers and mothers and daughters, even sisters, husbands, wives, off to this war? Because here's what the Kuwaiti royal family was doing while we were arming up to send our guys to fight and die. The Kuwaiti royal family was chartering, well, they didn't have to charter jets, they had their own. They were flying off to Switzerland to go disco dancing. So, but the Americans were gearing up to go over there and do battle on their behalf while they were having a good time in Lucerne or Lugano or wherever they went. So, anyway, the American people still weren't buying the war. They hadn't sold it to us. They had to figure out a way. How could they sell that Iraq war to the American people? And they finally came up with this. These are the product of a lot of thinking in the White House. They got to come up with a way. How are we going to stampede the American people into war? And so this is what they came up with. They came up with that. Well, now that Saddam's in Kuwait, he's on the verge of destroying Western civilization. He has, and I don't remember the numbers, but it's something like he has 15,000 troops. And no, I beg your pardon. I think they said he had 200,000 troops and 15,000 tanks now, right on the verge of Saudi Arabia, right on the border, and he's ready to roll in. That's his next move after Kuwait. He's going to roll into Saudi Arabia. That's the end of Western civilization. We depend on them for petroleum. He'll take that country. No more gasoline. You won't be able to drive to work. Everything will come to a halt in America, and Western civilization dies because you wouldn't give the government your support to go in. And so they used a very real threat. People took the threat of, no more petroleum for Americans. They took that very seriously. But one reporter at a little newspaper in St. Petersburg, Florida, thought, well, that's interesting. Let's go see. So she hired the satellite time. You could rent surveillance satellite time. She hired the satellite time, and she hired American satellite photography analysts to go through it all. When the pictures came in, and they could see everything. They could see, American fighters on the bases in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and they could see, where Saddam was in Kuwait or wherever. But guess what? No troops on the border of Saudi Arabia, no tanks, no supply lines, no quarters for the people, no roads that had been used for anything. It was all a lie. And it was discovered not by the major resources of NBC, CBS, ABC, Washington Post, New York Times, Newsweek, yada yada, Time Magazine. Well, not by them, but by a little reporter in St. Petersburg. And so she kept trying to hold the administration's feet to the fire, kept calling Cheney's office. What did you say about this? A pretty serious lie. And they just said, trust us about it. Trust us about it. So this is how they get away with it. But I'll give you another one from the George W. Bush Iraq War. The first one's the Gulf War. The second one's the Iraq War. And they had a group in the White House doing the same thing, trying to figure out how do we sell this war to the American people. And they spent a year trying to soften the people up and propagandize them about all the reasons for this war. So they had a group in the White House, it was called the White House Iraq Group, that considered the story that they could tell, how they could package this in a way that would be palatable for the American people to go to war in Iraq, which the people didn't really want to go to war in Iraq. And so they came up with, we don't want to see weapons of mass destruction. We don't want to see the final evidence of a smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. And that was the tagline. Final evidence, smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. Who was the White House Iraq Group? Were these guys that, had some knowledge about the presence and the feasibility of nuclear weapons based on the information? No. Were they generals that understood, that had spent their lives understanding, nuclear exchanges and the damage? No, it was nobody like that. They were all spinmeisters. The White House Iraq Group was spinmeisters. They were pollsters. They were advertising guys. They were guys that wrote talking points. There wasn't an expert about anything in there whatsoever, but they came up with smoking gun, form of mushroom cloud. And so the administration used that to terrorize the American people. Oh, yeah, we've got to go to war because smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. So even then, the people were a little reluctant to buy it. And so they would come up with these things like, oh, this was a really good one. They came up with these aluminum tubes. They found that Iraq had these aluminum tubes, and these aluminum tubes were part of the, refining process of uranium preparation. Yeah, aluminum tubes, centrifuges that they're needed. This is how they refine the uranium into a state that can be used to weaponize, and they get it down to 20%, but eventually they'll get it to 60% because they have these aluminum tubes. Now, our own Department of Energy guys that are actually in the business of things like centrifuges and aluminum tubes and refining uranium said, sorry, no can do. These aluminum, they don't work, they don't fit, they don't configure. No, they're not part of that. They wouldn't work. They're not unrelated. Sorry. That was our own Department of Energy guys that are in that business. But it didn't matter to the deep state. So in Dick Cheney's office, he and Scooter Libby sit down and package up this story about these aluminum tubes and why this is the final piece of evidence. We've nailed it down. Their words, not mine. We've nailed it down. Final piece of evidence. Now we're on the way to smoking gun in the form of mushroom cloud. And they packaged this story about the non-feasible, non-functional, inappropriate aluminum tubes, and they packaged it up as a great threat, and they sold it to the New York Times. So now this is a brilliant play that these guys pull off, and they do it all the time, and they do it to this day. So the deep state, and by the deep state I mean in this case, Scooter Libby and Dick Cheney working underground. The deep state package this thing up, and they sell it to the lapdog press, the New York Times. The lapdog press, in the form of Judith Miller, by the way, who had been relying on a bank embezzler named Ahmed Chalabi, who the neocons wanted to put in charge of Iraq once we invaded. Ahmed Chalabi, who had lied to us about all these weapons of mass destruction, and the administration and the New York Times.
What was his nickname? Curveball or something?
No, Curveball was another guy. Could get back to him. Curveball was another drunk. But Ahmed Chalabi was the guy. They totally relied on him for information at the New York Times. And McCain, speaking of McCain, he became a favorite. McCain loved Ahmed Chalabi. All the neocons loved Ahmed Chalabi because he was telling the stories about the weapons, and he was, after all, the guy that we would put in, and everything would be fine in Iraq. So Judith Miller had been running his fraudulent stories for a very long time. So she took the news story about the aluminum tubes, and it showed up under her byline. I think she had a co-writer on a Sunday morning on the front page of the big wide circulation New York Times. Look, aluminum tubes, nailed down, evidence, smoking gun, form a mushroom cloud. So it shows up there. Now here's the perfect part of the play. Dick Cheney shows up that same morning on Meet the Press. Why Meet the Press? Well, even his own advisors said, we like to go on Meet the Press because it allows us to fold and spin. So he shows up that Sunday morning on Meet the Press, and he says, so help me, Ernie. He says, aluminum tubes, uranium processing, nailed down the evidence, final evidence, smoking gun, form a mushroom cloud, and this is what we found. And they've got these aluminum tubes. And then he says, and this is the piece de resistance. He says, but don't take it from me. Here it is on the front page of the New York Times this morning. So it's, the deep state plants the story, the news media repackages it, they feed it back to the deep state feeds it, to another lapdog press, and the American people are the victims of all. Don't take it from me.
There's another tactic to this also that I found interesting, that it was illegal to lie to the American people. So what they would do is they would get, Rupert Murdoch had newspapers around the planet or whatever. They'd have it planted in some Australian paper that then they could replicate what Australia paper said. We didn't get we're just reporting what they said. Then they go on the Sunday morning shows and go, oh, look at the headline of here from New York Times from Australia from the Pentagon. Yeah.
It's my specialty, Ernie. I write about this stuff in Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. It's my specialty. Let me fill in a gap or two because it's unfreaking believable. So in fomenting, and I'm sorry for your younger viewers and listeners, this is the Iraq War, and that was in 2003 that started. It
Same
didn't end
crap going on now.
till
Same crap.
2011, but it's the same modus operandi. It's the same thing going on. Donald Rumsfeld told us then, well, this war will go on 6 days, maybe 6 weeks. I doubt 6 months. Well, they do the same thing now. I think it was Hegg said, well, we'll be there, 5 days, 5 weeks. I doubt 6 months.
Yeah, the war's going to pay for itself with oil.
It's the same thing over and over again. So this was one of the, so that you would buy the nuclear arms story. They came up with this account of Saddam Hussein trying so desperately to build these nuclear weapons that he was buying yellow cake, a precursor to uranium that he would use to make his weapons of mass destruction, and he was buying yellow cake from Niger, where it is produced in Africa. So they came up with this big story about yellow cake. This proves his intentions, and it's another nail in the coffin. We got the story dead to rights. So yellow cake, that was the story. And how did they verify the story? They had a letter from an official of Niger talking about this attempt by Saddam Hussein in Iraq to buy yellow cake. But the only problem is that it was a fraud. Somebody wanted, now think about this. I don't have to point any fingers. Everybody knows how this works. Somebody wanted war with Iraq for their own reasons. It wasn't yellow cake because they knew it wasn't true. They wanted war badly enough, and they want people to die because that's a component of it. You can't get away from that. And they want to destroy property and the prosperity and the well-being of hundreds of thousands of people. They wanted war badly enough that they're willing to forge documents and traffic them through the international intelligence agency community to make the case for the war. But as I said, a high school kid could have figured out that this document was a fraud. Now, the intelligence agencies didn't because they were, like our own intelligence agency, they're on board. They're not going to blow the whistle on a fraud that's helping them sell the war that they want to sell. But a high school kid would have realized there are signatures on this document from people that weren't in the government at the time the document is dated. It was so obviously a forgery. It didn't take the IAEA 15 minutes to figure out it was a forgery, but by then it was too late. But somebody wanted war enough to circulate this forgery. So here's what happens. They know it's sketchy. Like the people in the White House know that it's sketchy. So the president goes on. It's not just that, it shows up in the newspaper or some official says it or Ari Fleischer lies about it like he lied about everything. It's so sketchy that the president goes on the State of the Union address and he refers to this, attempt to buy yellow cake from Niger, but he sources it to British intelligence so that there's no responsibility. And we have learned from British intelligence or from British intelligence sources that they are acquiring. They know it's a fraud. Bush eventually had to drop it because it was so much of a fraud, but people in the administration kept using it at major gatherings and stuff whenever they could, even though even George Tenet, that dimwit, had told them, don't use that. That's such a fraud. Everybody knows at this point, 6 months in, after they've been saying everybody knows it's a fraud, but they kept using it. But they source it to somebody else that gives them plausible deniability. Well, we're just doing what the British said, so we didn't know ourselves, but they're good allies and we have reason to trust them in most things. If they made a mistake, at least it wasn't us. So, but this stuff goes on all of the time. And the American people are going to be led around by the nose and to their slaughter, the ruination of their liberty, the ruination of their prosperity, the ruination of their future, as long as they're willing to tolerate these lies. And of course, one of the reasons they're not willing to tolerate the lies is because if the other side lies, if you're an R and the D guy lies, you want to beat the snot out of him. You want to pound him on social media. You want to, picket him or whatever. You want to pound him. But if your guy lies, you look away. And if the R guy lies, the Democrats want to beat the snot out of him. And they want to go on social media and they want to make a big thing about it. They want to write letters to the editor and they want to complain about it and they want to have demonstrations at his town halls. But until the American people mature and they figure out that the R's ought to be responsible for cleaning up the R's house and not tolerating the liars in their own party, because it stains them. It harms their credibility. I think it hurts their soul. If they tolerate liars,
But
And
they
they
don't
let these
care,
liars be their
Charles.
representatives.
They
Well,
just don't care. They don't care.
They care afterwards.
Well, what do they care about? What is it that they're
Here's-
doing?
well,
Are they
here's what they-
offering up souls to,
Well,
Malak?
here's what they care about. It's not even. I don't think it's even that deep. We are on the road right now and it's been coming for a long time. But this Iran thing's triggering a massive crisis. It's much bigger than the price of oil. It is a massive crisis. It's a key break of the American military empire. It's a key break of our prosperity. It's a break of the dollar. It is a massive crisis, and the American people are going to suffer a kind of stagflation. I'm having a debate with one guy. He says they'll see it in the fall. I don't think you're going to wait till fall. You're going to see it you're going to see this summer, massive price inflation and things like food. Oh, sure, it's visible in fuel now. Everybody sees it in fuel first.
It's going to be a
but
food
you see
thing.
it in food and other things later. But they're going to suffer a massive loss of their prosperity and their freedom. And then on the other side, when they have a chance to think about it, when they have a chance to reflect, then they'll start, seeking out the truth or being willing to listen to the truth. I mean, I know people, I was so surprised that all of the MAGA people, not all of them, but maybe half of the MAGA people, having elected Trump on no more regime change wars and, America for Americans, and we'll use our money to build up America, yada. But when he wanted to do Venezuela, for example, half of the MAGA people go, yeah, right on, chest thumpers. We're all for it. Let's make the world safe for democracy. So at the time, they go whichever way the wind blows. But when they have to pay the bill, and they will, and it's going to start this summer, when they have to pay the bill and they see their children's futures substantially diminished and their own lives and their retirements ruined and so on, when they experience all that, they won't at first blame it on their own stupidity. They won't believe it on their own naivete that they supported this guy when he was lying to them. They supported him when he said he was going to do A, but when he did B, you kept supporting him. They're not going to see it that way for a while, but eventually they'll start assimilating it, and it'll be like, a lot of people now, believe that we were lied into World War II, that Pearl Harbor was a known event. A lot of people, believe that like Vietnam was a joke. Everybody knows that now that we were lied into Iraq. So they'll see it afterwards. It's basically too late to go back and repair everything, but they'll see it later and then they'll understand. But the question is, will they remember it the next time? And that's why I wrote the book. It's The Empire of Lies. So you learn it while it's going on right before your eyes so that you will remember it. And maybe we can reclaim our free republic and maybe if enough people wake up, and maybe we can't.
There is a tactic. There is a mechanism to this. And one of the things, just recently, a few days ago, we put this up. Here, let me put it up here. It was Planet Mind Control documentary, just out. And it reminded me of I don't know, it's at least an hour, 2 hours. And it was just all the things that you're talking about as a weaponized mechanism. And I got it from was it Amaryllis Kennedy? Is
I know her. Yeah, she's a good
RFK. One. Well, I first saw her on Tucker Carlson like October before the election.
Yeah,
and she married RFK the third. Was RFK Jr.'s campaign manager, and when he went Trump, she went on Tucker talking about their path to whatever. Well, she was a CIA knock and had married another CIA knock. So they're all CIA babies and CIA household of CIA. Then they divorced for whatever reason. She marries RFK the third. Well, beautiful woman, smart, intelligent, great stories.
Oh my
God. Then it's an hour and 36 minutes into a hour and 47-minute interview. So there's like 8-9 minutes where she goes, we recognize this in the CIA. This was it's like immersion therapy. And if you immerse people in this rhetoric, this propaganda, this mass formation psychosis kind of crap, that you can create your own reality. And you get people so immersed from every direction, from every blue-faced device that you're watching, the TV, your laptop, your tablet, your phone, your friends, and then you get, all of a sudden, you're locked down in COVID, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the antidote is, but it definitely is a weapon that was developed, that was understood, that they deploy all the time, and they're doing it again with Iran. This is why the Empire of Lies is so timely, that you can see the patterns. And not only that, it's the same people. They they bring, God, I saw he did that in the 70s. It was Rumsfeld and Cheney decade after decade. During this Iran thing, have you recognized any of the Iraq people coming out?
Sure.
Cabinet member. Well, name some of them, man.
Well,
who's coming back?
It was a whole administration of liars. Ari Fleischer. I wrote a piece. Matter of fact, you can find this on either antiwar.com or Libertarian Institute. I guess 6 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I don't know, about Ari Fleischer and the same old lies all over again. Fox News a couple weeks ago trotted out Condoleezza Rice. I about fell off my chair. Whoa! You mean they and I think Glenn Greenwald said they exhumed her and brought her out. But I posted something on X real quick about, you must be kidding me. You're not bringing out Condoleezza Rice again, are you? But they were. So it's all the same old people, and it's the same old stories. And they get away with it time after time. And I call the deep state the executive arm of the global American empire. So it's the arm that actually makes the things happen. And you look at, you look at people like Condoleezza Rice and R. Emanuel and George W. or Ari Fleischer and George W. Bush and stuff, and you think, well, these guys are the deep state. Well, no, they're really kind of the political class. They're the governing classes. The deep state consists of, well, obviously people at the top of the intelligence community and military intelligence, and a lot of them at the Pentagon, the Pentagon, well, I'll skip that part of the story for now, but a lot of the people in government. But it's not just the guys at the top. People think that, like John Brennan, former head of the CIA, James Clapper, former National Intelligence Director, they think these guys are the deep state, and of course they are, and they lie with impunity. When Clapper was found having lied to Congress under oath, when he was found out, he said, "Well, I gave the least untruthful answer I could." But when you get sworn in, you're always sworn in to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But he gave the least untruthful answer. Is that really good enough for the American people? Will you really want to put up with scoundrels like that? But anyway, the deep state isn't just these guys at the top. It's not just National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, who became Secretary of State for her ineptitude. But it's not people at the top like Brennan and Clapper solely. It works its way down through all of these minions, all of these, I hate to call them. Oh, I won't call them anything, but it works its well. Better judgment not to call them what they are. But it's myrmidons, it's minions, it's lackeys and stuff. And I'll give you one example.
Vampire familiars. I tell you what, it really hit with me is that you have, the Draculas. They got shy from the light. They're in their coffins at night, and they got their familiars out there. Pick me. I want to be a vampire too. They're out there running around providing insulation, doing the grunt work for the Draculas. And they're familiars. They're just out there doing the bidding of. And
of course.
Well, yeah. It's almost like the Dracula. Even to get down to baby blood. I mean, it's just. It seems like these stories have some more root and fact as time goes on. And that's what I did want to, before we go, I wanted to get into the philosophical aspects of this. because
Well, hang on. Let me finish the point about these minions.
please.
Yeah, I want to say that you know these petty minor bureaucrats, by any other name, they're all the way down the food chain in the government, and there's even an economic theory that's called public choice. You know, where they're not interested in the public good. Oh, you may think they are. You think they're interested in regulating industries for the public good? No, they're interested in pleasing their bosses. It's a whole different set of incentives that work their way all the way up. And really great example of how far it reaches down into the bureaucracy is the guy Alexander Vindman was a lieutenant colonel in the first Trump administration on Trump's national security staff, and he's the one that basically opened the door for he led the troops for the first impeachment effort of Trump. And he went to the Senate and he testified. And here's what he testified to the U.S. Senate. The problem, of course, he's Ukrainian. We were obviously, not supporting Ukraine. It was the American people's duty to go there and intervene and spend our money and go to a nuclear war if need be with Russia on behalf of Zelensky. But he was Ukrainian, and that was his interest. But he was a public servant. He was paid for by the taxpayers to work for the president. He was on the president's staff. But he went to the Senate and he said, well, the problem with President Trump is he's not following the dictates or not following the findings or not following the interagency consensus. The interagency consensus. He's defined the interagency consensus. And what is the interagency consensus? It's the consensus of the deep state, the interagency consensus. They all agree. They always agree. They're like bees in a hive. They all work for the good of the hive. They don't sting one another. They go about their different jobs. Some, are worker bees, and some are, keep the queen cool by beating their wings, and some go out and forage, and some, they all have different jobs, but they don't sting each other because they're bees of a common hive. And so this guy's just a mere lieutenant colonel. But for Trump not following the interagency consensus, which is the deep state presumptions, then he has to be taken out. So it works its way all the way down. And one of the peculiar things about it is that nobody has to tell them what to do. Everybody's always looking for, well, who gave the order? They know what to do. They know the goal of the empire. So the executive arm, the deep state, is the executive arm of the global American military empire. It is the global American military empire that provides them their livelihoods, creates the profits for the arms manufacturers, allows them to re-elect to the congressmen and senators that vote for the deep state's global military empire, and they endow the think tanks that write the editorials for the global American military empire. Nobody has to tell anybody what to do, and anybody that's looking for smoking gun evidence, they told him they met at this place on this date, and then this is where they laid out their plans, and we're trying to get it. You don't need it. It's the global American military empire, and its executive arm is the deep state. These are the people in government. Now, the establishment, we've talked about the establishment figures, they're the people, the New York Times and the Council on Foreign Relations and all of those, Treasury secretaries and World Bank officials and all of that nonsense. That's the establishment. They're kind of out in the open. They have public lives, but the deep state, is just people that are following the needs that they intuit, that they know it from signals of those above them or for the greater glory of the global American military empire. They know what to do. They are bees of a common hive. And they are so thick. They swarm these issues and they swarm people. What's his name? Joe Kent came out the other day. It's just like, okay, release the swarm. The Schmierboot is coming after him now. They're gonna start digging into his past. Anything he ever did, if he ever smiled at a pretty girl, we'll have it and we'll call it infidelity. I mean, it just, and that's how they work. It's a hive mind, in my view.
Well, I'm trying to insulate people from poor decisions, poor cheerleading, team jersey, red, blue, whatever crap. And to me, the fundamental base thing, which has always been my deal, is that quit delegating authority to someone else to make these world-changing, life-impacting decisions for us.
Sure.
And
I'm with you.
it's at that root level, and Empire of Lies is certainly, and don't delegate it to these guys, you know.
Well,
but it's more than just these guys, individuals. I mean, I'm sure you name a lot of names and give examples, but it's something more fundamental. It's how we are lazy, or we think it doesn't matter. And to me, it doesn't matter, and I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. It's over the horizon. I don't care. I'm past caring. It's not any influence. I don't care. But with your book, the internet, AI, save us, Walter Cronkite. I mean, you know, we got an optimist. You know, it's going to be Max Headroom. You know, it's going to be some, you know, AI Max Headroom guy. You know, the truth. I mean, you know. So this is I'm looking at the future, because I've been saying for a long time, I'm going, you know, you'll know. How will you know? I go, you'll know, because it's going to be a food thing. It always comes down to a food thing. Well, here it comes. And it is what? Well, lies. You're going to take from us our money, our children, our great-grandchildren, and they're never going to pay off the debt. They're going to try to inflate themselves out or grow themselves out. It's over. It's you know, the dollar meltdown, your first book, it was just, you know, laid it out clear. Here we go. So I'm of the opinion for survival. I mean, you know, we have to, you know, find bait. I advocate that technology is such now that we can have a first-class life, not too hot, not too cold, not too hungry, not too thirsty, you know, not too naked, not too unsheltered, not too whatever, and have the same quality of life that Don and I are trying to, you know, demonstrate out here. We enjoy our life much more now. Never felt more secure, more self-reliant, more American. The internet and AI has provided us an opportunity not only to research what we want to learn what we want to share what we want to. And we can see that coming, and thus we started Freedom's Phoenix. But it's now another weapon. They're coming after. They're manufacturing reality, bombarding us with crap. Empire of Lies helps map that out. What do you think the role of the internet, your book, people coming to this conclusion that, how'd you know they were lying? Because their lips are moving, kind of thing. So this is advice that philosophically to the audience, what should they do? It's not just question everything, not just be contrarian. There's got to be some principle, some fundamental basic. What do you say you do here, government? There's a revolution gap, and it's from the promise and reality. And sooner or later, the promise separates from reality enough that you get that revolution gap. And that's where we're going. And I can see it happening. We even had our own T-shirts on. Government doesn't work, I want my money back. The revolution gap. This is coming, and I need, what advice do you have other than seeing the patterns? Read the book, Empire of Lies, just so you have the evidence, not just to your neighbors and friends and family and so on, to yourself, that you are insulated, you're inoculated against the bullshit that they continually do over and over and over. And as you point out, they wheel out the people that helped them do it before, you know, they do it again. At some point, there has to be a determination that we're going to go extinct if we keep falling down this, for all this BS. So what is it that you're hoping from the book, the capability of learning about this, of checking out the validity of everything that you say, everything that you write about, being, you know, remembering it correctly, what really happened? Now what? What should people take from this? What's the solution, Charles?
Well, the solution is This is not satisfying to people. And when I'm asked this question, then nobody's ever satisfied with the answer, but it's the true answer, and I'll share it with you. Everything comes down to the individual. Everything comes down to the individual. Sweep your own front porch and the whole world will be clean. Everything comes down to the individual. So each individual has to be responsible, has to take responsibility, has to start showing some integrity. I'm on a tour about my book and doing media tour and doing, podcasts and talk shows and stuff too. Besides just being on your show as longtime friends and associates, but I've been doing a lot of them. I was on one with some neocon whack job the other day, and he was so angry at me. He said, I started talking about the illegality of our wars. Let me even back up. The American people have a constitution, and it's like the rule book in the NBA. If you fire off the shot after the buzzer goes off, does the shot count? No, it doesn't count. How do you know? Because we have a rule book, and you may not like some of the rules, and maybe some could be improved, but this is the rule book, so everybody can learn to function around it. They learn what the rules are. They know where they can go and where they shouldn't go, and so that's the rule book, and it's the Constitution. And the Constitution says if you're going to have a war, it has to be declared by the people's representatives, because it is the people who pay for it. It is the people who die in it, and they get to decide. And here's what would be nice if people understood that when, we talk about checks and balances in our American system of government and divided power, we divided some authority here and some there. It wasn't just dividing authority like, here's one for you and here's one for me and here's one for them and here's one for you and one for me and one for them. That's not how they did it. Our governing class there, the leaders of the American effort, were really learned people. And everybody around the world knew it, even at the time. They knew that, we had talent and intelligence and integrity in our leadership class that put the British leadership class to utter shame. And you can find British historians that will confirm that from morning till night. But we had an unusual class of people that showed up at one time. It's just like, in the Renaissance in Italy, you had all these people showed up at the same time in a little town, probably half the size of Flagstaff or something, that all showed up at one time. You had Donatello, Raphael, Da Vinci, on and on and on, all showed up as a strange harmonic convergence of these artistic geniuses. Well, we had that in the American governing classes that led the revolution and created. So I'm not saying that the Constitution is perfect and has to endure forever, but it's the rules of the game. And why did they divide things the way they did? It wasn't haphazardly. It wasn't at random. They said, knowing the historical precedents, they said, look, the executive branch, executive officers, it can be prime ministers, it can be kings, it can be dukes. Throughout history, the executive has a propensity to start to engage in needless wars, in elective wars. We will not give war-making authority to the executive branch. So they gave the war-making authority, Article 1, Section 8, for good and sufficient reason, to the legislative branch, the people's elected representatives who can be held accountable for their bad judgment, who can be scorned and reviled by their constituents in the neighborhood for their bad judgment. So that's who got the war-making authority, and yet we haven't used that since 1945. And this guy, I was telling you, I was on some neocon radio show, and I think it was in Detroit or something, and he was so angry at me because he said, well, then that would make all the wars illegal. And I go, that's exactly right. It makes all those wars illegal because they didn't have a declaration of war. Now, you can pretend that you take an oath to the Constitution, just like, Clapper pretends that he will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But you got to make up your mind. You're going to be self-governing people. I've listened to Republicans and Democrats too for all of my life, having been, kind of a political junkie as a kid and being involved in stuff as a very youngster. I've listened to these guys talk about the Constitution. When they go to a convention, they have a fundraiser, they go to a dinner, they have a crowd at the park. We love the Constitution and so on. But when it comes to actually upholding it, they don't do it. So, but the problem is not that liars will be liars, not that corrupt people will be corrupt. The problem is the people of normal, average integrity don't hold them accountable. So by that, I mean, you have joined the liars crew. You're now one of the myrmidons. You're one of the hangers on. if the Constitution says, and you know it, that only the people's elected representatives can declare war, and you excuse the executive for declaring war on his own. You say, well, it's all right because it's, smoky gun for a mushroom cloud. It's Nicolas Maduro. He and Chavez were both very bad people. It's this, it's that. It's Benjamin Netanyahu says we got to do it today. Whatever it is, if you don't insist, and the guy gives me this thing about, well, this is an important thing, and we're not going to have to, tolerate threats to our country and wait for the elected official. I said, look, everybody knew we were going to war in Iran. We spent weeks shipping a big armada over there. Everybody knew what was coming. You mean that people in Congress couldn't take a day or 2 days to debate it? We were attacked in Pearl Harbor on December 7th and December 8th, even with its inferior transportation and longer travel, slower travel. They had a declaration of war on December 8th. That's not to say nobody has ever said, reasonably ever said, you don't have a right of hot pursuit. You see the crime going on, you got to do something immediately. That's one thing. Nobody said you got to have a declaration of war, when they steal your boat, the Pueblo, or something like that. That's a different circumstance. But we had plenty of time. We've always had ample time to declare our wars. And it's not just a useless exercise. Here's what it does. When you declare war, go back and look at the declarations of war against Germany and Japan. Go back and look at old declarations of war. They generally spell out, okay, who is the enemy? What is the reason for this war? What are the resources we devote to fighting it? How will you know when it's over? How will you know when you've won? Because you spelled out all those things. In the current war in Iran, we have none of those things. We have none of those things. We're not sure who the enemy is. Oh, it's the Ayatollah. Okay, you replace the Ayatollah, you got another Ayatollah. We're not sure the resources. President Trump tells us that on August 11th, he said, like in 13 seconds, he said 7 or 8 times that we've won. So why are they coming back for? We spend $1 trillion a year on the war machine. Why are they coming back now for another $200 billion supplemental appropriation if we've already won? We haven't spelled it out in a declaration of war. Who is the enemy? When you declare who the enemy is, everybody domestically, people know that everybody knows that rendering aid and comfort to the enemy is very dangerous. Statutes say that could be punishable by death. So you want to be aware who the enemy is. But the president doesn't get to, if we're free people, if we're self-governing people, if the governing classes work for us, if they're our employees, the president doesn't just get to wake up in the morning and say, I'm pissed at Bolivia, or I hate Greenland, and today they're the enemy. It doesn't work that way. So if you're doing business with Bolivia or with Greenland, you should be able to go right ahead doing business with Bolivia or Greenland, rendering aid and comfort to Bolivia or Greenland or whoever it may be, because there is no declaration of war. And how can you be aiding and comforting the enemy when nobody has declared an enemy? The president doesn't get to do it because he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. But the people who tolerate this, knowing full well, nobody needs to tell most people that Congress gets to declare war. I've repeated it all my life. Others have too. It's, anybody that's taken a high school class in Constitution should be able to look it up. You can get a pocket Constitution. Who declares war? Oh, the Congress declares war. But the presidents keep declaring wars, and they always turn out badly. They turn out like Vietnam. They turn out like Korea, which is a war that never ended, really. They turn out like Iraq, Syria. They turn out like Libya. They turn out like this mess in Ukraine. They're all because we've never had a declaration of war. We've never had a clear view. Nobody can answer the questions that a declaration would answer. Who is the enemy? What is the reason? What are the resources? How do we know when we've won? They do. So
you say it turns out badly, but for whom? I mean, they do it for a reason. Why? My missile penis is bigger than yours? I mean, what? That might be with Trump, but I mean, what? Why?
Well, here's the problem. I already mentioned like Raytheon stock. You just go look at it. They make Tomahawk missiles. They're doing great. So the merchants of death always do great. That's why they arm both sides of many, many conflicts. That's why, the biggest game is that we sell the weapons to third world countries and dictators around the world, and yet they don't have the money to pay for them. So we have a term in there that the American taxpayer will pay for the weapons that they default or can't pay. So So that is part of it. But I was asked this a lot of times during the Iraq War. Well, who's behind it? Who wants the war? Well, it was a harmonic convergence. Look, Karl Rove, as we already mentioned, he wanted to win the midterm elections. He wanted Bush to be able to get reelected in 2004. It was good for the president because you busy giddy minds, as Shakespeare said, busy giddy minds with needless wars. So it was good for them. It was good for the Pentagon. There were people in the Pentagon that wanted the war because the Pentagon was moribund. If you don't have a war, how do you advance? If you're a colonel, how do you become a general? You got to have movement. You got to have chewing up people, moving up the ranks. You got to have a bigger budget. You got to have things growing if you're going to move. So
okay, I want to shift
there
your
were people.
expertise.
Well, wait a minute. It's good for the media. We talked about that. It spikes their ratings. It spikes revenues. It's the narcotic of fear. So it's good for them. I saw guys on TV, Ernie, during that period, guys like Lawrence Kudlow. He's everywhere as a financial guy on Financial Talk TVs. Lawrence Kudlow says, well, whatever you say, it'll be good for the stock market. Oh, it'll be good for the stock market. Then there were the people say, oh, it'll be good for Israel. We want Israel. It'll be good for Israel. So all of these people and all of these interests come together. And of course, there are the combat envy afflicted. They want it because it's exciting. There are chest thumpers. There are, chest beaters that like war because it's interesting. War, holy war. God, how I love it, said Patton. So there are all these people with all kinds of different motives. And the only way you can turn it around, in my view, and I'm sorry I interrupted you to finish the point, but is at the level of the individual, one individual awakening at a time, and it's never satisfying to anybody.
Well, this is the right here is the shift that I wanted to make towards the result and what we remember and what we would do is you've been very attentive to the economy, precious metals, gold. I mean, you and Ron Paul have a lot of
dollar,
on
the U.S.
gold,
dollar,
the dollar. So economically, this has to have an impact. Of course, it has.
Oh,
We have our debt. We have, the interest on the debt. We have who has the debt, who's going to pay the debt, who's not going to pay the debt, how they're going to threaten with the debt, the IRS, them to go to the stable coins, crypto, whatever. How do you see this affecting us economically? It already has. Yeah. It's baked in the cake what's coming.
Okay.
What can we expect economically?
It's a special kind of issue for me, and one that I watch a lot and I write about a lot. This is the big one. We've talked about this. Gold's going to go up, but this is the big one. It's much bigger than the price of gold or the price of silver. This is the big one. You see two things going on, and they're not separate. They're conjoined at the hip. And one is the world fleeing already, long before the Iran war, already beginning to flee from the U.S. dollar standard. And you see that as they've tried to create other payment systems that bypass our payment system, as they create new currency agreements.
They keep saying it's not happening.
Yeah, it's happening. Bilateral deals between, Pakistan and China or whatever, they'll trade in this, or Russia and China. All of these deals, not to mention the clamor for the central banks of the world to start adding gold to their reserves and replacing the dollar. I'll give you one because I follow this closely. It wasn't so many years ago. Look, when the United States spends money at this level, but only takes in money at this lower level, they've got to fill the gap. And there are a couple of ways. The most, I guess, honorable, you could call it, way to fill the gap is to borrow the money. So when they borrow the money, they sell bonds. They sell U.S. Treasury bonds. And the bond says, you give us, like, let's say, $100,000 bond. You give Washington $100,000, and they'll give you this bond, this fancy piece of paper. It's actually not paper, it's just digital now, but you get the idea. We'll give this bond that says, we'll pay you back in 30 years, or we'll pay you back in 20 years, or 10 years. We'll pay you back with an interest rate of 4% over the course of 20 years or 10 years, or whatever the term of the bond is. And so they're loaning us money, and we promise to pay them back. So it was only a few years ago. Yeah, China had loaned the United States, the U.S. Treasury. They had purchased U.S. Treasury bonds, in other words, loaned money to America, to Washington, almost over $1.3 trillion. I think it was almost $1.4 trillion. They were our creditors. They were loaning money to us. We're the biggest spender in the world. We're the biggest debtor in the world. We have to borrow a lot of money to keep the game going. And they were willing to loan us money. And so they loaned us $1.3 trillion or more than that. And yet everybody around the world understands now that we can't pay it back. We simply can't pay it back, not by any honest, open means. The debt's too big. We can't pay it back. So they've started backing away. And so instead of still loaning us $1.4 million, they've started redeeming those bonds when they come due and not rolling them over, not buying new Treasury instruments. So now they're down to half that. They're down to like 6.7 hundred billion. They're down from 1.3, 1.4 trillion to half that, $6.7 billion. They're backing away. And as those bonds come due, they'll back away from those. They're backing away because they know what our ultimate end game is if we can't borrow the money. First of all, if we want to borrow the money and people don't want to loan it to us, how do we get them to do it? Well, they have to raise the interest rate. And interest rates are going crazy in the last couple of weeks. They're climbing. And so we have to pay more and more because people know, we're going to cheat. We're going to print money. We're going to inflate the currency. We're going to cheat them. So they start asking for a premium, an interest rate premium over the inflation rate. So if the inflation rate's 3%, then they want 6%. So we have to keep raising the amount of money that we offer to pay them, and that runs up the deficit. We have to pay more interest every year, more and more interest. So and this stuff keeps going, and it's at the end game stage right now. We have a visible national debt of $39 trillion. We've run up, just since Trump was inaugurated in January last year, just in that time, we've run up another 2.7 or 8 trillion dollars in debt in just a little over a year. And so the game can't go on. But here's what's happening. You're gonna get, with this war, you get a slowdown in the economy. That's a stagnant economy. That's the stagnant part of the portmanteau term stagflation, an economy that doesn't grow. Now you have greater debt demand than ever, and yet the economy isn't growing. It's not throwing off the resources. It's not generating the wealth to meet the debt demand. And at the same time, you have the other half of the portmanteau stagflation, the inflation side. Prices are going up and up and up. So now the American people are caught between this thing that, higher and higher prices, fewer and fewer opportunities, less and less earnings, less and less opportunities. Your business sells less. You sell fewer cars. You have fewer customers, no matter what your business is, and yet the price of things keeps climbing. Ernie, this has already started now, and we've talked about this for years. It was going to come back around. Stagflation was the order of business in the 1970s. It was even called the stagflation decade, and it ran gold to the moon because the economy was moribund. It was basically dead. It had a heavy burden, and inflation rate kept going up and up. Here's what we just found out a couple of weeks ago. The producer price index for the month of February was up 0.7%. So if you annualize that, this is the producer price index. That's on its way. I like to describe it as, it's on its way in a month or two to being consumer prices. That, if you annualize what happened in February, that's 8% inflation. 8%. So in the meantime, how about the productivity of the country, the gross domestic product, the GDP? It's a weak measure, but it's the only one that people rely on. So for the last quarter of last year, they just revised it down. They had called they said that it shows annual growth for the year 2025. The quarterly growth showed annual growth of 1.4%. They just cut that finding in half to 0.7%. Growth is collapsing, and it will continue to collapse with higher oil prices. It will continue to, airlines aren't going to be flying as many flights. People aren't going to be going on vacations. People aren't taking as many trips. American households are, I think, already out $400 a month with the new prices of energy just since the start of this war. They're not going to have excess. Prices are going up. The productivity of the nation is sliding. Companies are pulling in their horns, the airlines are canceling flights. Hotels and tourist venues are understanding they're not going to have the traffic they expected. Earnings are down everywhere, unless you're a war maker. If you're a Raytheon, maybe they're not. But that's what's headed our way. It is starting to appear right now. It is a very, very grim situation. And the truth is, it's much more grim than the double-digit inflation and the double-digit interest rates that we saw in the 1970s. It's much more serious now. The damage, everybody looks at, at energy prices. Well, it's not just energy. It shows up first in energy, and then it shows up in food. All the farmers are planting now, but they can't afford the fertilizer. Kinks in the pipelines and stuff like that. It's much bigger than it was in the 1970s. Much, much bigger, and it's just starting to become apparent. And it can't be fixed. This is what I want everybody to understand. If Trump, by some magical act of being the best negotiator in the world, were to get the Strait of Hormuz open again, suppose he did, by agreement or by military force, Strait of Hormuz, it's not going to fix the problem. We have crushed supply lines that are years, decades in the making. We have this war has ushered in the smashing of storage facilities, refining facilities, pumping facilities, recovery facilities, transportation facilities, docks for transportation, pipeline. It's done huge damage that will take years to replace. And I want to give your listeners one great example from Trump's history. It's one I followed at the time. I quit watching it and I looked it up the other day, and it's still the same dilapidated condition it was in. The Chinese like pork. If you go to a Chinese restaurant, there's all kinds of pork dishes on there. The Chinese in China, they eat a lot of pork and they need feed for it. So they need soybean. They like soybean feed. It's an affordable sort of feed for the pork that they raise in China. So for a very long time, they have been buying soybeans from American farmers, and it's been good for American farmers. And American farmers, were planting, huge crops, rows after row after row of soybeans, and it was shipped to China, and everybody was happy with the deal. And then in the first administration, Trump started, wielding his tariff sword around, and all of a sudden the Chinese couldn't buy the soybeans from America because they were too costly because of the tariffs that we put on them. And so they turned elsewhere. So these supply lines take years to build, but they also can be replaced. And so immediately people in South America, farming interests in South America, transportation and interests in South America said, well, we'll fill the gap. We can grow soybeans. Maybe we can even undercut the Americans if we get up to speed. So they started clearing land and planting soybeans. And then they started, making roads for transportation to the docks, and then getting, ships that could take it to China and stuff. And they built all of this infrastructure, and Americans just kept losing share and losing share and losing share of the soybean market. It wasn't very good for the farmers, but it was very good for our competitors around the world. So China got the soybeans it wanted, our competitors got the crops, and yet the farmers lost their market. So then Trump, starts hearing the farm interests squawking about it. So he adjusts the tariffs. So I don't know if they're less severe or eliminated. I doubt they're eliminated, but they're less severe to make American farmers competitive again in China. But guess what? The market share has already been lost, and now you've got another low-cost producer. So I looked it up after following it back during the first Trump term. I looked up the Americans have never, in all these years, been able to reestablish their market share of soybeans. And to make it worse, this is how government works, because the farmers were squawking about the damage that our government had done to them and to their market share and their prosperity, because they started squawking and complaining to their congressman, the Trump administration said, oh, we've got to come up with billions of dollars to bail out the farmers. So the administration hammered their market share, and they haven't recovered it. And they've lost market share permanently, in my guess. And yet then we had to provide another bailout for them in the form of a giveaway, because you don't want the farmers mad at the elected officials, or they might not vote for them. This is how the game works. But this one is so much worse. There's so much damage that has been done. So I describe, look, it's not just what we talked about, the end of the global dollar standard unfolding in time in an accelerated pace. We're losing that. That was in process. But now, as a corollary of that, it's not just the dollar. The corollary of that is the global American military empire is in a state of collapse. All those Gulf monarchies and stuff that thought that they were buying the protection of America found out that they weren't getting the protection of America. All of these relationships are changing. They're changing in ways that will help dismember the global American military empire. At the same time, it hurts our currency, the value of our currency. And here's what the politicians do, and it's a syndrome that's widely known, and it's called well, it's not known to me. I can't remember the name of it, but it's called it's a syndrome when the imperial overstretch, when the empire stretches too far, and they start seeing exactly what we're seeing now. They see that there are competitors in the world that weren't there 50 years ago. More competitors, military competitors. Look at what Persia has done so far in stretching this thing out for 3 weeks. There are other competitors. There are competitors against the dollar. There's gold. There are BRICS. There are other payment systems. There are competitors. And the geniuses in Washington, the governing classes of America, look at this new challenge to their global hegemony, not as a result of their failing economic might, because it is the economic might that provided for the empire's military might. It's not just that their military might is fading, it's because their underlying economic might is gone, their manufacturing base is gone, they've inflated the people to a sense of destitution, they've regulated the economy to a moribund state, but they look at the challenge to their global hegemony, their dominance of the globe, and they read it not as a challenge to their prosperity, they read it as a military challenge, and so they divert still more otherwise productive money to the military. And so it accelerates the imperial overstretch, and this is how empires die. And it's going on right before our very eyes. So it's gonna start getting critical this summer. I think by the fall, everybody will be screaming and squawking. Of course, the Congress, Republicans, the president wants to get
critical this summer. In what way? Define that.
Well, you go to the grocery store. See it. The prices are rising so fast. People are already talking about having to cut back. They can't afford the groceries they once did. Used to like to have a steak.
No, fuel, man. Donna has this big diesel, and it's $5 and something. Oh, damn.
Yeah.
I mean,
diesel
here
fuel's
we go.
up 44, 45%. How do you like that? And so it's not just fertilizer. You understand, the farmers run a lot of diesel equipment to provide food to the American people. Well, if it doesn't pay, then they can't run that diesel equipment. If the fuel's if the fertilizer's too costly, if the diesel fuel is too costly, they've got to make a decision.
You and I started, working together on your show was like 05, 6, 7, around in there. And it was the one thing that I remember was the consumer price index. They kept changing it. It goes to the core CPI or what. They took food, fuel, and housing off.
Yeah.
There's no inflation, just saying, we changed it. And I don't know what it is now. I stopped paying attention in the Empire of Lies. I don't believe the damn thing they say anyway. But how do you gauge what inflation? How do you gauge what stagflation, deflation, inflation? What I remember you and I interviewing, I had Addison Wiggins on, my show regularly, and what was it?
The Daily Reckoning.
It was Addison Wiggins and Brennan. It was Empire of
Bill
Debt.
Bonner.
Bill Bonner.
Yeah.
And
great writer.
So, the Empire of Debt, we could see they were talking like, this debt you guys keep talking about, it's more like 80, 90 trillion dollars. Well, then later you find out, Buffett talked about the weapons of mass destruction or financial weapons or whatever is coming. And then you did regular. I remember calling, billionaire Jim Rogers from all over the world, New York or Shanghai or whatever, coming on your show. And he was, I tell you when it was. And when you wrote your first book, The Dollar Meltdown, you're going, Ernie, do you have all those CDs that you recorded all the shows that I give you crap about? Why, yes, I do. What's it worth to you? I mean, but what you wanted in there was Jim Rogers made a point in, God, like 05, 06, around in there, that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had stopped issuing their reports. They had stopped reporting. They had stopped. They knew the housing market was going. They knew it was a whole bunch of other empire of financial lies. And he goes, it's over. Here it comes. Just FYI, everybody get ready. Gird your loins. It's going to be a food thing. I mean, oh yeah, and I remember him saying, yep, the Ferrari drivers are going to be the farmers. Well,
yeah.
And that would be true if it wasn't for the manipulation of the governments and the debt that they put them on, and you can't fix your tractor, and it's so bad. All of this stuff was predicted by me, predicted by you, predicted by your guest. It's just been, here we go, and it seems inevitable. And the shows that I do and the people I talk to are generally, how do we thrive it? It's coming. It's baked in the cake. It has been for a long time. And all we needed was the petrodollar to go away. Well, that's happening. And I'm going, how does that manifest itself? What do we do now while we still can? Because they're strip mining the middle class in America. Why? 2 reasons. 1, that's where the money is. And 2, because they can. And until they can't. The cannot is when. After they've already done it. After a mushroom cloud is somewhere. Mushroom cloud, nuclear war, comply no more. Try and get another dime out of me, after you have nuclear clouds that you were supposed to be preventing. Try. So this is, it's unwinding, and your book, was it red and blue and black all over, or no, black and blue and red all over?
No, I really resent my publisher because they chose that title, and I grudgingly went along with it. And nobody ever on 150 interviews, nobody ever got the title right. Maybe one time. But it's red and blue and broke all over. And I think they liked it because, they knew I was equally critical of the red party and the blue party. But, they were talking about, red ink and broke. But it's because both of the parties, the red and blue party, are making us broke all over. So they liked it. They thought it was very witty. And so it wasn't my first choice, but I went along with them, and yet
red and blue broke all over. Thank you.
Nobody, it's that over, newspaper, right? It's black and white and red all over. It was sort of a takeoff on that, So it had all these little strands, but it never really worked. And
it makes more sense now. Red and blue and broke all over. That's good. Yeah, I give them some props for that. But the point is that this has not been uncovered by you. It was always an economics thing. The war, morally bad, but what it ends in is economic calamity. And that manifests itself into, you go hungry, bow. You don't have enough, you can't pay your electric bill, you can't pay your gas bill, you can't. And Donna and I, we were poor for the longest time. I devoted everything into this. But during all that time, I kept throwing silver under the bed, kept putting it in the nightstand, kept doing the only thing I could do. Donna, we need more beans. That kind of thing. And I'm spending a lot of the time now. It's going to take me another week or two to finish burying a 20-foot sphere in the ground for our root cellar. That's what I'm working on right now. And I should be finishing, one of the prototype dwellings, my workshop. And I go, nope, because we need more food. Where are we going to put it? Yeah. In a shipping container? It gets too hot. So we need that. So I, calculated the cost-benefit analysis, and I need to get to where we can bury, you know, the food, we get into the cool earth, we have the freezer down there, we got to start stockpiling food again. So this is what we're doing because I feel it coming. Am I paranoid? Am I doing the wrong thing? Charles, what do you think?
Well, it's obviously coming, and it's fuel and food. It's every aspect. It's every aspect of our lives. Medical care. American lifespans will start getting shorter again, as they did a couple of years ago. They started decreasing and stuff because of the cost of medical care. The government can't afford to pay all those things. I mean, it just can't. It's wasted. Well, look, just since between I'd say 2000 and 2022, let's say, the American people ran up debt on these wars of over $8 trillion. And now we have to pay interest on that $8 trillion every year because it wasn't like we just spent the money and then it was over. It was just added to the debt. It's $8 trillion is a lot of money. You know, it's $8 trillion, 10% would be 800 billion, 5% would be 400 billion. It's hundreds of billions of dollars per year in debt service. So it's gonna attract everything. I mean, look, you see it now. The interest rates are high. Everybody kept praying over the last few months for lower interest rates. The Fed's going to cut interest rates. Maybe my kids or younger people will be able to get a mortgage at a nice low rate. We're waiting for Fed to cut rates and stuff. They can't cut rates. If they cut rates, it's a desperation. It's the end of the world because prices are going to go way, way up without cutting rates. And if they cut rates anymore, I mean, nobody's going to know. You know, same old story. The inflation rate's 9%, and the Americans are offering you 5% to if you lend them money. Nobody's going to want to do it. Look, the foreign governments, they know this money printing game really, really well, and they fleece their own people with it. They know how it works, but they are not going to stand around and be fleeced by us on this any longer. So they all kind of willing to have a little, dollar reserves right now because they can use the dollar reserves in a number of ways. It was always, OPEC oil was paid with dollars. Well, they didn't have to have dollars because they could go to the currency markets and switch, euros to dollars to pay for their oil. But it was a convenience and it was a tradition, it had been going on since the end of World War II or longer. So, but all this is breaking down right now. It's breaking down before your very eyes. There's nobody in Washington that I'm aware of, with the exception of, certainly nobody in the administration that I'm aware of that understands any of this is going on. We're really in deep trouble. And yet, Tom Woods, who you know and I know, had a great line the other day. He started asking some of these questions about something. And he said, but when I ask these questions, you cannot answer me. It's not legitimate for you to answer me by saying, USA, USA, USA. But he's right. That, when you start to question the administration, their choices and stuff, that is your answer. USA, USA, USA. And it's not a flippant answer. It doesn't answer, why we're going pell-mell down this road. So my job is, I figure, I want to wake people up individual by individual. And yet I'm standing here with a new book out, and what I've done for a long time, we're racing 80 miles an hour down the road. I've been ahead. I looked down the road ahead of us. I went around the curve that you can't see because that's what I do. I went around the curve and I saw that there's a bridge washed out there. So I come back, down the road and I see you're, spinning down the road 80 miles an hour, and I kind of wave you down. I go, hey, you might want to slow down. There's a bridge out. Oh, you must hate America first. But my answer to you is USA, USA, USA. Okay, go ahead, 80 miles an hour, go around the curve, see what happens. So that's where we are. It's a thankless, flippant job, but somebody's got to do it.
Okay, before you go, let's talk about the beginnings of the book. You started this, hell, your entire career paying attention to all these lies. But to put them into a book, and I know you started it earlier, but now is the perfect time to come out with this. I mean, Venezuela and Iran, oh my God, man, this isn't on repeat. So give me the chronology of you putting this together, having it sit there, and then, we just got to polish up the last chapter here. Coach said, get her done, because here it comes. Tell me about the formulation of this book, while you were writing all your others. A lot of this stuff you and I lived through, you know. So I'm the actual publishing of the book itself and how is it doing? I mean, I wanted to have you on right away, but I go, man, I need to read it, you know, and I haven't finished it, but I did, you know, been really busy, and I'm just going, yeah, I remember this, I remember this, I remember this, and it gets to where it's a tool for those of us that, and I'm trying to get you James Corbett. Corbett, make sure you talk to Charles on this, because I mean, damn, this is everything that we've known, you cover, that we cover, and I want to get the chronology of the book itself and what finally convinced you and others that now was the time. What was it?
Well, I hope your listeners and viewers are interested in this, because it's a kind of a winding road. I don't know. I think it's my fate. You know, the Dollar Meltdown. You can see one right behind me over this shoulder. The yellow book there, the Dollar Meltdown, on this shoulder. No, this shoulder.
One. That one.
Yeah, this one. So I wrote the core chapters, 3 of the core chapters of that, years before I wrote the book. I said, well, these are essential principles, and I'm going to write these 3 chapters that are in the middle of the book. And then when it was time to write the book, I had these 3 core chapters, and I folded them in. I had to update them a little bit, but the basic information. And I don't know why, you know, when I wanted to write it, I had to wait for years before it would be palatable to people. It would have done a lot of people a lot of good if I could have gotten it out a lot earlier and been very profitable, even more so. And it was profitable for people. I hear about it all the time, but it would have been even more so if I got, but you know, for some reason I have to. So with this book, The Empire of Lies, I actually wrote the core concepts of this back in, I'm going to tell you, probably 2017. And I trotted it around a little bit. I had an agent that, you know, he didn't buy any of this, you know, stuff. He's kind of a liberal guy. And, you know, he just thought, you know, you can't say this about America.
You're doing it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So, but I trotted it around a little bit, and, you know, even the places that you would think would be amenable to a book like that, you know, were like, well, you know, it's, you know, they basically didn't buy the idea until after Trump became elected, and they started talking about, you know, people started talking openly about the lies of the Iraq War. So anyway, I started writing, and I actually put the core ideas. You know, I had like a couple of chapters that needed to be, you know, filled in, and I had an outline and where I wanted to go. So when I had all that as far back as 2017, I guess, and I couldn't get it published. So I thought, well, you know what I'll do? I'll just write it as a screenplay. Because if people think that this is, you know, this is unacceptable, this is not possible, this is, you know, none of this stuff could possibly be true, I'll write it as a screenplay. I'll make it a motion picture. And so I did, and I used, I mean, it's a truth-based, it's a reality-based motion picture script. And, you know, I got some pretty good nibbles on it, and I got to, you know, I won some, I don't know, honors, I guess, or, you know, finalist awards and screenplay competitions. But when I turned it into the screenplay form a few years ago, so I'd spent enough time doing that. I didn't want to fool with that anymore. And then finally, about a year ago, I thought, my God, it's now or never. I've got to get this book out there. So I just went furiously to work on it, and I brought everything up to date, and I added the new stuff that it had subsequently, and I got rid of the old stuff that would be, you know, too old for people to really care about today, that young people wouldn't really know about. Be, you know, like, I didn't want it to be a history book. So I got rid of some of that stuff, and I folded in the new stuff, and was able to provide a trajectory of where all of this lands, how all this goes. And so our mutual friend Scott Horton from the Libertarian Institute publishes books through the Libertarian Institute, his institute, and they've done great. His book Revoked, you know, how you know, we got into the Ukraine war, how the United States and the deep state and, you know, the Washington establishment provoked the war in Ukraine, has done fabulously. And he has a couple of other books, Brighter Than the Sun, about nuclear weapons, Enough Already about the war on terror. It's called Enough Already. Great books. Scott has a mind like an encyclopedia. He remembers everything. Right. You can't name, you know, a third-ranking foreign official in some Syrian or Iraqi government 30 years ago that he doesn't know the guy's story. So anyway, so I said, why don't you guys publish this? He goes, yeah, we'll publish that. So I took it to him, and he brought it out here at the end of the year, first of this year, and I'm really happy. And so now I'm going back into public debate again. I mean, I've been doing, I'm writing stuff for current consumption. I still write about the economy for private clients, but I'm writing some pieces about the war and the state of the country and so on for the Libertarian Institute, and I'm writing writing some other stuff, and I'm doing some,
well, do you have a Substack?
No, but
Slacker.
I don't. Yeah, I don't really. I'm spread pretty thin. But anyway, and now so I've signed on to the Libertarian Institute, and they highlight my work, and they've named me executive editor too. So
really,
very
cool.
So it creates a little bit of visibility for me and for my book and my work and stuff. So
Scott
anyway,
Horton is brings back memories as well, because Scott was, admitted he's a skateboarder from Austin, Texas kind of guy. I remember he and I met when I went to Crawford, Texas, when we were at Air America. I was covering on the boots on the ground kind of thing with the protest against Baby Bush and the war. And that it was the Pelosi 06 campaign of here comes Obama. Of you go high enough up on the pyramid and you find it's a all-seeing, move on, left, right side of everything, controlling everybody. Cindy Sheehan stuff, Camp Casey. Scott was there, with me, Alex Jones, and so on. And we were the only ones that understood what was going on. You'd have all, and then of course the bad guys doing it knew what was going on, but it's all theater. And our coverage during that time was and you used to have Scott on a lot because he, of course, talk about 9/11, talk about war. Then he became anti-war radio, on antiwar.com, and then eventually him and Will Grigg started the Libertarian Institute, and then Will passed away, and Scott would not let it go. Well, what happened is now he's the expert on all things Middle East war, be it Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, whatever.
Oh, and Ernie, he is an expert. My gosh, I mean, anybody that has to debate him is just
he kicks their ass.
It's amazing.
I remember he was on with some neocon, whatever, on Lex Friedman, and he would not let him say one freaking lie without interrupting you, lying sack of snot. Well, Lex Friedman had him on again
for 10 hours.
Yeah.
10 hours of downloading Scott.
He goes, we don't need anybody else. We just let you download. And it was amazing. So our friend Scott is the man. And I got to see him at Ron Paul's birthday party this last August. So we got to hang. But it has been a lot of great people that we've introduced to the public, that that you've read, that you participate, that you debate in. With this book coming out, are you seeing another round of Charles Goyette coming out, and are they trying to diminish your importance, trying to shadow ban you, trying to whatever? Because they do not want Charles Goyette out there giving them what for. I can tell you that.
Well, so as a longtime friend, you know better than anybody. I pretty much took myself out of the public debate a few years ago. Someday I'll recount the story of why I just didn't want to do it anymore. I had an experience that was just like, I can't believe this. I'm involved in this debate, and these are the terms and the levels at which it's going to be conducted and stuff.
And the people you're debating?
Yeah, well, it was just, I don't want to recount it because I still haven't assimilated, but I said, that's it. If this is how this American future is going to be decided, in debates or discussions or presentations or material at this level, I'm not in for it anymore. It was just it had descended to such imbecility. I think it's the level of debate has risen now again. And anyway, so I put myself back in it, and I've just opened myself up. I don't know really, what I'm going to do, but where I used to have a lot of opportunities coming my way, and shows and things that people wanted to do and stuff, and I just swept it all aside, and I got offered a national radio commentary, and I didn't want to do it anymore. I just couldn't stand it anymore, and so I've kind of gotten over the the kind of depressive effect of how bad it was at the time, and it's a little better now. So I'm just opening myself up, and something interesting will come along, and and I'll do that. And things interesting. I got a feeler from somebody the other day about something, and Scott was good enough to put me on as executive editor of the Libertarian Institute. So it's opened some doors for me being out again in it, and so I'm riding with the tide, go with the flow.
I'm going to get a Charles Goyette AI. I want to going to be Charles Goyette AI on Freedom's Phoenix. That Charles said, it's been great to get caught up with you, Charles. I'm so glad that you're back in the fray, because it is so rare. I mean, it's not as rare available great minds that we can glean information from. Like I have Karen Katowski on quite a bit. That's one thing before you go out and tell this story. When you were doing, kind of not for hook, line, and sinker or support the troops, Baby Bush's Iraq war kind of, and they were explaining it to you. There was, you'd have your own Secretary of Defense or whatever, Colonel Hackworth, that had his own website, that he was a very popular Vietnam era guy that, he's, the soldiers officer kind of thing. And Karen Katowski was a lieutenant colonel in the Pentagon when Cheney and Rumsfeld walking right by her, and she's writing for his site. And of course, they're looking for a guy. It couldn't possibly, misogynist. It couldn't possibly be a woman that's beating the crap out of us. And it wasn't even really a secret. She was publishing this stuff, saying, "What the hell are these people?" And it was, and we just had her on here recently, but the last couple of weeks. But the her, Colonel Hackworth, the information that you were sharing was why they were targeting you. And I'm wondering, are there any others like that now? Even back then, you were able to find the dissenters. Who do you think the dissenters are now?
I don't know. I mean, and I'm not entirely agree with all the dissenters on everything. I still maintain my point of view, but I mean, I posted a congratulatory thing to Joe Kent when he came out of the closet.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for Tulsi Gabbard to do the same, and I know the syndrome. I know what to try to excuse him. I don't know if it's right, but sometimes they think, well, I'm inside and I have some authority, and maybe I can use that to steer away from the madness and be some help in that way. I think it's more helpful if she makes a dramatic statement and resigns. But there are a lot of people, and you can seek them out and you can find them. Karen was wonderful, and I used to get her on the air all the time back during that time. I thought of her the other day when Tucker Carlson said, the top brass, the IDF brass from Israel, make themselves at home at the Pentagon. They just walk right in. They don't have to sign in. They do what they want. They bark orders and stuff. And people start, no, they don't. No, they don't. Hey, that's impossible. You must be anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist to say that, because it's not true. Yet I have a long memory. If I'm not mistaken, Karen Kwiatkowski was telling me about how they were doing that in the Office of Special Plans under Douglas Feith and Paul Wolfowitz and stuff, that they just had the run of the place. And, show ID, don't you understand? So, I mean, there's precedent for this, and so I find it very easy to believe that it's still going on. Anyway, she was wonderful, but there are people out there, I'm sure you have them on too, and it's those people, a special badge of courage and place in heaven for people like that are willing to tell the truth at the
and for Charles Goyette.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad he's back, and they those have no idea what that means. And whatever service I can be, and we're launching Wednesday night. I think James Corbett and I are going to go ahead and launch Libertas.Earth, which is the philosophy of liberty animation. We got 50-something languages, and you know about that, and you're supportive. But the That's kind of my contribution, along with your book and things like that. It's just the solution is with us. It's as individuals. Decentralization of power and authority and decision making down to the individual. That's always
Amen, brother. Amen.
It's kind of been our, and this whole, it's been 10 years. We're doing the Trump Report once a week with Dr. Frank Tamburri, and I'm really tired of the discussion. It's still, it's like the argument over, do you pick someone to delegate your authority to rule you? And I'm like, well, there's the first problem right there, And, well, you got to have, because can't have nice things if you don't have somebody, going to war for you, or so. It's so gone so bad. The only solution, my presentations, me traveling, the country, the world, speaking on different things, it's always been about reclaiming your sovereignty as an individual, that you own yourself, that you take responsibility for educating your children, the food that goes in your bodies, the purity of the water, the air. God knows what the hell they're doing with that. But, it's coming. It's here. It's almost biblical. Oh, here's one thing to end on. In the late 70s, early 80s, I remember for whatever reason, I was encouraged to read The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And it was about, Revelation and the coming, whatever. We got to, take down the Dome of the Rock Muslim temple, rebuild the temple, get a red heifer to whatever, the Antichrist guy, blah, 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 blah. And you can see them, it's like they're checking off boxes. It's not so much that it's preordained as much as they're ordaining it. I mean, they're using the Bible as a deed to the land. When you do any amount of research, we're going to be doing this Thursday, a thing on this, and I'm just, they're using the Book of Revelation as a script to justify whatever the hell is coming, whatever we got to do. We're gonna make sure there's an Armageddon kind of thing, and I can see it that this was something that kind of sparked interest in whatever, and it seems less of prophecy and more of a movie script. What's your opinion?
Yeah, well, people are using stuff like that to further their political aims. I don't think it's legitimate, and I think there are a lot of people manipulating a lot of things to prevail in their earthly designs for earthly kingdom that they control. Right. And I'm not a part of it, not interested,
Well, the lies, uncovering, the secrets and exposing the lies, empire of lies. This has been, Charles and I have been on the same page on this. Thank you for spending this extra time with me. I got, almost 2.5 hours out of you. I was hoping that we would be able to just have a conversation. You guys get reintroduced to Charles Goyette, because he's going to be a voice in this and in this wilderness of bullshit. Who do you have that knows, what's happened? I mean, he was in the Army during Vietnam. He was, he was a journalist then. He owned his own station, became a very popular talk show host at, a few stations here, and then he's on the Clear Channel version between Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh. Or it was Rush Limbaugh, then Sean Hannity. Between there was Charles Goyette, with logic and reason, freedom-oriented, constitutional, libertarian, whatever the heck, and those did not like it, in spite of being number one, overwhelmingly, bright future on their stations. And they
same thing they did to Tucker, but on a much bigger scale. He was number one on Fox. Same thing they did to Tucker. I'm a microcosm compared to him, but they'll sacrifice the number one spot in an instant if somebody goes off the reservation. Yeah.
And we experienced it here in Arizona with the Arizona Republic newspaper getting bought up by Goyette and doing the radio. Been there, done that. And my whole thing was election fraud in Maricopa County, Arizona. Gee, Neon, I freaking told you so. So this
what a surprise.
I know. You're never a prophet in your own land, man. I mean, it's just.
No,
but
no.
we have been proven to be right, and what satisfaction do we get out of that? Not a bit. It's just
only if things change in response. That's the only satisfaction, and they haven't.
Right.
Changed.
I mean, we need to have, this chronology in the empire of lies, so you understand that you're always being lied to. I mean, it's like constant. Yeah. It's like, this is another comment I wanted you to comment on before we go. Politicians and politicos, you catch them on stuff, and you ask them a question, even if the truth would benefit them more, they still lie. It's like default. I know something you don't. Well, the truth would have, hell, I was giving you a softball. Nope, they lie. What pathology is that? Why do they do that? You know what I'm talking about.
Sure I do. You know what? It's a pathological pathology. It's just pathological.
Yeah.
It's pathological.
There's something wrong with these people, literally. And I didn't understand it until, I don't know, God, 5 years ago. It wasn't very long ago when we started studying sociopathy. And I'm just like, they're psychopaths. Well, psychopaths, sociopaths, what the hell does that even mean? They do not have the capacity to empathize with someone, and they don't have shame or guilt, and they just don't care. Because a lot of times they're incapable of caring. They just want what they want because they want it, and they're willing to do any and everything to get it. They're willing to lie. They're willing to cheat. They have an empire of lies. And
they're willing to
attracts
kill.
These people.
They are willing to go so far as to kill innocent people who are not in the way of their plans, their dreams, their hopes, and they're willing to kill them in the pursuit of their own private objectives. They're willing to kill people wholesale, wide scale. And
you have to support that which you want to see more of. We need more Charles. Charles Goyette has been doing this for decades. Decades. He has proved himself. Decades. They took him to the cliff, the mountain overlooked, and this all could be yours, Charles, if you would only. And he goes, nah, I'm good. And then, what? I've been through this. Well, they tried, it was their, the new guy took over from Francis at KFNX where we were at. And they were, wanted to sign, give me a better contract before I said, nah, I'm good. I left and got replaced, and I started working with you. But what they did is they wanted me to sign a contract, but it gave them ownership of all my archive. And I'm going, oh, hell no, because there was a bunch of archive they wanted. And I'm going, nope, not going to. Well, you're going to be, coming. Sorry when you don't have that microphone. I go, you think I give a crap? But I'm for saving humanity, man. I don't give a shit about this microphone. So this is, I got children and grandchildren. They don't understand that. Charles understands. He was offered the world, national recognition, national guests he had on constantly. He was right there, and they presented it to him, if only. And he didn't. Props, man. Props. And I'm telling you, this is now Charles's time that we need to support him. Go buy the book out of principle. Because you want to support that, you want to see more of. More Charles Goyette for me and for you.
Hey, thank you, Ernie. Thank you for having me on. It's available only at Amazon.com. It's called Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. There are several books out there, by the way, with the name Empire of Lies. This is Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. This is the one about the real world. There are like spy stories that use that title and so on, but this is the real world. Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. That's the book cover. It's unmistakable. When you see it, you'll know it's the Empire of Lies about the real world. Thank you, Ernie.
And this is the beginning of a resurrection of Charles's input. Sooner or later, they have to have Charles coming to give them any credibility of anybody that's doing a dissection of what the shit is going on. You know, Charles knows from the beginning, been there, done that, talked to the principals, to the point that he was targeted heavily. And he wrote the article, How to Lose Your Job in Talk Radio. So he knows how to do that. He knew what was coming. And that's where, and my role was, I was on, the other stage. I brought Charles over. I'm like, you get your ass over. You stay on the air. Well, they're not going to be able to, I don't give a shit. Get your butt over here and keep, we need this. Well, I'm doing the same thing. Charles, we need this. You keep your butt out there, man, and I'll do what I can to help. Peace,
Always
brother.
thanks.
Thanks for coming on. It's been great to catch up. I'm glad you and Allie, you're doing well. Things are good in Tennessee.
Good. All good. Life's good.
Now, he moved from Arizona to Tennessee. My daughter and son-in-law, they almost picked Tennessee. I think they are picking Oklahoma, Donna. Is that? They've been traveling around looking for where to light, and they want the rolling hills of and whatever. So, this is, we're going to lose one of our family members from Arizona. Damn it. Bring them grandbabies back. But this has been a great interview. I'm glad people got reintroduced to you. I look forward to seeing more of Charles Goyette, Empire of Lies. Go on Amazon, Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole, and that's what it looks like right there. Go get some. Charles, thank you very much for coming on. It's always good to talk to you, brother.
Good to catch up with you, Ernie, and thank you for having me on. Say hi to Donna.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, bud.